This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, this honorable chamber was debating the Safety and Health at Work Act, Cap 3, the amendment to the Safety and Work and Health Act. To that we shall resume. Honorable member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I stand proud to support the amendments before us to the bill. Amendments that would make provision for three things in particular: the certificate issued by the Chief Fire Officer relating to fire escape, etc., the making of regulations respecting the right to refuse to carry out tasks where there is imminent danger to the health and safety of an employee, and the making of regulations respecting forms and fees. Mr. Speaker, in this submission, I turn my attention first of all to the making of regulations respecting the right to refuse to carry out tasks where there is imminent danger to the health and safety of an employee. And I start here because this is an area where in labor relations or industrial relations, very often this becomes the subject of dispute. I struggle often, Mr. Speaker, when disputes arise in industrial relations related to matters of a health and safety nature. I think that there are a number of things that can be negotiated, but I think that the health and safety of workers, the health and safety of people is something that ought not to be compromised. When the Health and Safety Act, the Shaw Act, was passed in 2005, that act at section 104 made provision for employees to be able to withdraw themselves in circumstances where they consider that they could be in imminent danger. And although the provision is there, in actual practice, many employees feel threatened, even when they find themselves in circumstances where it is reasonable for them to consider that they are in imminent danger. Too many employees find themselves, or as the Minister of Labor might say, not employees, but too many people in the work environment find themselves compromised and perhaps sometimes even being exposed to threats, job security threats, because although they find themselves in imminent danger, they are made to feel that their complaint is not legitimate. They are made to feel that more people and so many people out to work and want work, and if you don't want to do this job, you can leave the premises and so on. So as the honorable member for St. Peter, who has the responsibility for the Ministry of Labor, pointed out earlier, regulations become necessary when people who have the responsibility and who are obligated to do reasonable things do not act in reasonable ways. And so, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the fact that the amendments before us make provision for these regulations, and I hope that when the regulations are put in place, that they would be pursued and they will be monitored in a way that gives the act, the current act, teeth. In other words, strengthen the current act in its current form. Mr. Speaker, I was also very heartened to hear the Minister of Labor in his very lengthy submission point out the fact that soon to come, to complement this amendment, the current act and the amendments that are before us, soon to come would be some amendments to address the whole situation of labor clauses, Public Contracts Act. And I go there because there's a correlation. As was outlined, at length, and I don't need to repeat, but just to summarize, there are too many instances in which those companies, organizations who fail to observe health and safety and other provisions, but for the purpose of debate today, we're focusing on health and safety. Too many instances in which they fail to observe the health and safety requirements. And this particular piece of legislation soon to come is one that, once laid, as we heard, would ensure that certain minimum standards are made the obligation of businesses who are awarded contracts that, as we heard, are being paid for from the public purse, meaning contracts that are being paid for by the average citizen who works and who contributes into the system, that this act would supplement and complement the Shaw Act and the amendments that are under debate here today in this honorable chamber. But, Mr. Speaker, permit me to go further. Permit me to go further by recognizing that when businesses do not adhere to ensuring that working people are afforded minimum standards, are afforded fundamental rights, that they are undermining the objectives of some of the very things that are so carefully outlined in the Shaw Act and that these very amendments seek to address. You see, Mr. Speaker, working people aren't just considered working people for an owner when that owner has a set of people within his or her establishment that is called an employee or that is called a worker, for that matter. But working people extend beyond the premises of an owner. Working people extend beyond the premises of the occupier. Working people refer to those who are in the company next door, those who are within 500 meters of the company. Working people refer to residents as well in an area who themselves are workers and contributing. And what am I saying? And where am I going with this? Mr. Speaker, there are people who are awarded contracts, not only in surface construction, but in areas like quarrying. Mr. Speaker, who breach the health and safety requisites, not only in terms of their implications, the implications that the breaches would cause for people in their immediate work environment, but who breach the health and safety requisites and create problems for other workers in neighboring companies, and that create problems for the human beings, for the people, because the Minister of Labor is often very careful in highlighting the fact that we are not just referring to workers as workers or objects, but there are people in an occupation, or there are people in a vocation. And we have too many companies that are observing the health and safety requirements and environmental requirements in the breach only, but who still are beneficiaries of public contracts. And they're beneficiaries of public contracts, although it is known by those awarding the contracts, is known by many around, not only the residents and so on, but is known by sometimes even people that occupy spaces within this honorable chamber. But yet, there are awarded contracts. I think, Mr. Speaker, in my own situation as the Member of Parliament for St. George North, and when I make this point, I think of the residents in Lower State. I think of the residents in Lower State I think of workers in areas surrounding a quarry in Lower Estate where there have been breaches. There have been failures to observe tongue and country planning requirements. There have been other failures. People can't breathe. We heard about 2 years ago about George Floyd that spiraled into the Black Power movement and the Black Lives Matter. People can't breathe, and I want us, and this is not for dramatic purpose, but I want us to consider a situation where we're living in an environment, and day on day, you can't open your windows. Even when you close up your windows and try and keep yourself to yourself as much as possible, you literally can't breathe. And there are breaches that are being spoken of. And there are breaches that are being repeated time after time. And there's provision being made by warning after warning. And as far as the people that can't breathe are concerned, they're only seeing an action, hearing idle talk, while the threat to their health, safety, and well-being continues. I can only imagine that the residents in Lower Estate and surrounding areas would become even more nervous when they observe what happened just across the road in St. Thomas, where a recycling plant also understood and known to have committed some breaches that caused some disquiet and discomfort, or maybe much discomfort, to residents surrounding. All of a sudden, public being not being made aware of what has changed all of a sudden, that would mean that it could start operation again, but health officials seemingly going ahead and giving the okay. So imagine how the workers at Lower Estate, the residents at Lower Estate, and any other residents that find themselves in a similar position might feel when they hear promise after promise, commitment after commitment, it will be addressed. And they're seeing no address, they're seeing work continuing as if their lives don't matter. And guess what? They're working in environments where they're seeing that a government, their government, is awarding contracts to the organization that is committing the breach. Mr. Speaker, even when there could be legitimate reasons for why problems are not being addressed, when people are not being updated, and when people are treated as if they don't matter, people start to behave as if they don't matter. Mr. Speaker, Barbadians now, with the amendments before us, would have the ability to go and see that a workplace is complying with the highest standards of fire safety. That will be true for the residents in Lower Estate and surrounding areas. That will be true for people who live in King Garden. That will be true for people who live in St. John or anywhere that a company is operating. There must be the provision that people can go and see and verify that the workplace is corresponding or complying with the highest standard of safety. Mr. Speaker, because in the particular case that I mentioned over in St. Thomas, that it will be hard or difficult, as we had witnessed some years ago, to control a fire situation, the public at large, in hearing this debate, must also be satisfied that enough has been done to ensure the safety and well-being of their family members and their friends who have to live in these areas. So, Mr. Speaker, back to the point that I was making. Well, it is known that people in Lower Estate and surrounding areas have been suffering in circumstances where proper permissions and authority seem not to matter, I look forward eagerly to when we can stand and debate the public contracts changes to strengthen existing ILO frameworks that have been presented for ensuring that the utmost public well-being is maintained in awarding contracts, including ensuring that the lowest bidder doesn't only get through to the demise of employees, workers, people in work, however we want to term them, and other businesses and residents that will be impacted when people don't do the things they're supposed to do and seem to be rewarded by us for bad behavior. I had made a point in my head that I wouldn't speak on the aspect that the amendments seek to address as it relates to fees. Because, Mr. Speaker, I have made a point in debating other bills in this honorable chamber that it is wanting to put fines and penalties in place. But when you put fines and penalties in place and you don't enforce them, then people laugh at them. A predecessor of mine in another organization that I belong to would say they become laughatable. Because when you look at a fine, for instance, the fine of $100 per day or so it is, that's boo-boo money to a lot of people. It means nothing. There are some employers who would knowingly and comfortably commit breaches, satisfied within themselves that I could pay that and I could pay it times over. But the benefit of undermining the law or the obligation of satisfying the requirement of the law might cost me more than the penalty. So then let me pay the penalty. And besides, they don't follow through on these things anyhow. It's just something on paper in a labor legislation that nobody seems to pay attention to. I was making this point in a meeting to representatives from the Labor Department, I believe it was earlier this year or late last year, and they sought to satisfy me and some colleagues that they do enforce, and people are brought under the whip of the law, albeit for little sums of money, brought under the whip of the law when they commit breaches. But guess what? These are not things that are known. I believe that I am well placed to know when people are being penalized for certain things. And if I don't know, I know that John Public can't know. And I know that when enforcement is being done and it is not known, a person who might be tempted not to do something because they don't want something similar befalling them has no way of knowing that these things are actually acted on. But some person could go in a shop this afternoon and thief a sweetie or a purse or something, and that person will be in one of the newspapers, going to court to spend a couple hearing that they're put on remand for some time for that breach or that failure to act in a way that is good and proper. We need to hold people accountable. And if we want to get the labor situation, the industrial relations situation in this country in a more manageable state, in a state where there is far more peace than there is instability, then we have to pay attention to the level of fees. I make the point again, although I said I wouldn't make it, and the enforcement of the legislation. I must commend the honorable member in his submission for assisting my vocabulary, because indeed it was something that alerted me that I might want to question on the use of flammable and inflammable, and if it was just a cosmetic change, because I saw them as one and the same thing. But I really welcome the explanation, and I put that one at rest. But we noticed that in the amendments as well, that there is use or there's introduction of the word employer in some sections. And the Honourable Member and Minister of Labour did well to point out the different places in the legislation where use is made of employer or occupier, etc. But I wonder where at sections 109 to 111, where the word employer is particularly included, where the provisions relate largely to offenses and penalties and legal proceedings. I wonder if the Ministry of Labour might not find it also necessary to make their workload lighter, certainly by ensuring that reference to employer could also be included at Section 6, in particular Section 6.5, which speaks about the duties of the occupier. Because experience teaches that we want to avoid at times misinterpretation. You can't cover everything in legislation, we accept that. And there will always be interpretation of the law. But based on experience, we should want to avoid some of the pitfalls that we encounter day to day as we go about trying to manage industrial relations in this country. And why I mention 6.5 is where a person does not see the reference to employer in that section which speaks about the duties of the occupier, a person may easily interpret that if it was intended for any reference to an employer, it would have been specifically said, and maybe the fact that it was not mentioned might mean that it is not considered as being explicitly relevant to an employer. So that is something, if I missed it, and if it is more explicit than I have considered it, I would welcome the clarification. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm at the point of concluding. I didn't find it necessary to repeat a lot of what the Honourable Member of Parliament for St. Peter gave in his introduction, because the 2 hours spent was carefully spent outlining and detailing very carefully for the public and for listeners the details, not only of the amendments, but the history and the actual Shaw Act, and how the amendments and the regulations and so on would make provision for strengthening health and safety. That is now a fundamental right. But before I conclude, I must make the point that I'm extremely pleased that in all the regulations now that the minister will have responsibility for ensuring that there is provision for the medical examinations for workers at fuel stations. This was not only a manifesto commitment of this party that is now in government, made in the 2018 manifesto or so, but this was for a long time, I'm aware, that the largest union in this country has been pursuing this as an issue as it tried to organize workers working in fuel stations and petrol stations for that matter, but particularly in fuel stations, wherever efforts were made to organize, to ensure that better conditions could come to these workers. They were met with challenges that saw people either being fired or, if they were lucky, being reassigned to some other station if the owner had ownership of more than one location. Why I'm glad and why I stand proud to be able to associate with these changes and being associated with this party in government that is introducing the changes is because what that largest trade union organization was trying to achieve, or part of what it was trying to achieve in bringing decency and better working standards to people in petrol stations, fuel stations, and in other areas, domestic work and so on. It has been achieved firstly through the Minimum Wage Act, and now specifically through these regulations for fuel attendants, they have the possibility of having better health and safety conditions brought to them, and the government is to be commended for that. I remember early during COVID going into a station, and you know the requirement, as it still is, that you wear a mask if you're relating to the fuel attendant, the service station attendant. And I remember on this particular occasion going in, and there was a young lady who was servicing my vehicle, and she had to be about 6-7 months pregnant from the looks of it. From the looks of it, I am quick to say. And I couldn't help sit there and feel a sense of overwhelming sadness that we are now in a pandemic and have to be taking responsibility for assuring that we wear masks so we don't possibly pass on this thing to other people. But day in and day out, these workers come to work in these conditions, and have not for COVID, COVID might actually be protecting her and the unborn child because she's wearing the mask. Have not for COVID, who knows what she and the unborn child and the many others who found themselves in that work situation while being pregnant would be exposed to. So the changes are certainly very welcome. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable member has indicated and given enough to show that while we might not be perfect, that this government, this party in government is doing its utmost to walk well and do well towards becoming a model employer. But I want to suggest, and I don't want to be dissenting for the sake of it, I want to suggest that when we speak within a context, I know a number of members in this chamber are given to speaking about the lost years and so on. But when we speak about these things, we must recognize that in those lost years, there were a number of things that weren't given attention to, that need to be given careful attention to. So it means that we cannot afford to tarry. And while we are doing a lot of good things, and I think I said it on the last occasion I spoke, using the words of my late father, there's always a better best. So it means that we must continue not to tarry, but to walk quickly towards bringing social justice, towards bringing decent conditions of work to working people, people within working premises and so on. But in doing this, we must also ensure that we go beyond just the worker or just the person that we might be seeing on a particular occasion, and working more comprehensively and swiftly towards bringing decency not only to them, but their family members. When we speak of workers and their family members, like in the Laura State situation, we are speaking about those who are living around a particular area. Mr. Speaker, in about 2 days, I would find myself with the Honourable member of St. George South in another situation where St. George will get the chance to speak. And I hope that the residents of Laura State and other affected areas in St. George North will come out in their numbers. And I hope equally that the officials who make these decisions, or the officials who tarry and don't walk quickly, will be present to speak to them. I can't speak to them. I declare my hand. I am not in a position on this backbench to influence directly, so I hope that the officials would be there to speak to the residents, to speak to the residents of the affected areas. Auntie, no, I can't call you auntie. The honorable member of St. Thomas, they're coming to you soon, and I hope your residents will treat equally to seeing the importance of having their voice heard when the time comes. Mr. Speaker, so not to subtract from anything at all I've said in my submission, I would like to use this opportunity to thank the honorable member of St. Peter, who is the Minister of Labor, for seeing that these amendments were brought here today. I would like to thank him and the hard-working team that he has in the Labor Department and the Ministry of Labor. And I would like to commend them as I encourage them to do more and to walk more swiftly into ensuring that we bring a comprehensive set of labor legislation here that will have more relevance for working people and their families. And I would like to thank them as well as I encourage them to do more, including making the calls to be better resourced so that they can ensure the enforcement of a lot of the pieces of legislation. Good pieces of legislation, solid pieces of legislation that we have to address industrial relations in this country and to ensure that it's kept in a state of greater stability. With these words, I thank you.
Honourable Member St. George South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I look across from me and I'm smiling with my running mate and fellow St. Georgian member for St. George North. And I may not be as exhaustive as she was or detailed as she was. And I want to congratulate her on representing those good people of St. George. And I'm certain you spoke for me as well. But I stand here, Mr. Speaker, to commend the member for St. Peter for bringing this amendment to the Safety and Health at Work Act, Cap 356, to make the provisions as outlined in this bill, the 4 provisions. But, Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me, and there is another compelling reason why I stood on my, while I rose on my feet this afternoon to say a few words, and I don't want to make her shame. I know she's not ashamed of me, but there's someone in this chamber sitting who raised me from a baby, my mother's sister, and she may not look it, but she's over 60, and I'm not going to tell you who she is, but if you look in the chamber, you can look and see the resemblance, and she's a beautiful woman, and I say no more. But I want to speak this, yes, did a wonderful job. The genes are strong and they're well, and those who are seeing the camera can speak to that, and I want to do justice to this bill and make her proud, even as for 5 minutes in this chamber. And I want to recognize her in a meaningful way, because it is people like her who allowed me to become the first graduate in my family. And I want to thank you, Auntie Diane. Mr. Speaker, I don't think that when I look around the chamber, I have had 19 years in the private sector. I have had tremendous battles with a man who I know is the mentor to the member for St. George North, and a man whom I have utmost respect for, and who taught me a lot about industrial relations. I'm sitting across from him as an engineer and as a manager in the North with that wonderful institution that taught me the importance of health and safety. And I want to begin on this note because when workers are satisfied with the working conditions and they feel safe from injuries, they become more productive. I want to repeat this. When workers are satisfied with the working conditions and they feel safe from injury, they become more productive. And Mr. Speaker and members of this chamber, that is where I will premise my speech this afternoon and my few remarks on part two, the making of regulations respecting the right to refuse to carry out tasks where there's imminent danger to the health and safety of an employee. And I speak from a position of experience in that when I make these comments, tears come to my eye because on Friday coming, I'll be doing a eulogy for a very close friend of mine, team member in St. George, who was shot on the 16th of June. But tears come to my eye because when I think back of my days when I came into the chamber this morning, and I think back of the days at Harvard, I presided, or I was a member of a team that saw a young man in his 20s from that wonderful part of St. Lucie, working at that wonderful place in St. Lucie, picked up a forklift one morning without any instruction from his supervisor and proceeded to assist in a breakdown to get a plant back in operations. You know, when a plant is down, you lose money. And those of you who know what I did back then would understand what I'm saying. The member for St. George North certainly understands, because I know she did a lot of work, the member, with respect to industrial relations at that institution. And that person, in the quest to assist his colleagues in his 20s, freshly out of Samuel Jackman Prescott Institution, took up a forklift, heading down to the reclaimer building. Those who from that lovely place will understand what I'm speaking about. Raw material preparation. And in his bid to solve a problem at 4 o'clock in the morning, the forklift overturned on him and killed him. Mr. Speaker, when we examine every single aspect of safety regulations, yes, member, and I see you nodding because you understand where I'm going. Every single aspect of the workplace and safety and health regulations showed a breach. No supervisor to conduct. And part 3 of this legislation speaks to safety of equipment. Whether the young man was wearing a safety belt. We know when we get into our cars, the first thing we do is strap up. Those of you with modern day cars would hear the beep, 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 and you have to strap up. Whether he was wearing his forklift seat belt or not, we can debate that up to today. But what we can't debate up to today is whether he's alive or he's dead. And what I can say to you, having been a member of that team, and having to sit across from the Barbados Workers Union, who did their job. I must say they did their job. They represented workers' rights. The employer had a duty to that employee. And when I say the employer speaks to management, the employer speaks to the supervisor, but also that employee has a duty to himself as well. So when you look at the safety at work procedures and the safety at work regulations that have been placed in this act, to amend this act, in hindsight, had we done our safety brief prior to, or had we presented with this piece of legislation back then, one wonders if that young man would have lost his life. And I speak to creating a culture of safety more so than having a safety thought. Minimizing the risk. Risk is likelihood by severity. That is how engineers calculate risk. Risk is equal to likelihood multiplied by severity. The likelihood of something occurring and the severity if it occurs. And you minimize risk along these lines in a manufacturing environment. But I started there because we still have some employers in the 21st century who, and I jumped before you, member for St. Michael East, I jumped before you because I understand you and I are of similar vintage, and we are not afraid to speak. You know, I can be criticized, but there are still some employers who are taking advantage of employees in this country. And I'm asking the unions, they know who they are. It must stop. Because we must call them out, because we will get a similar Barryborn incident. That was the name of the young man who lost his life. Handsome young man, member for St. Lucie, you know the family. Persons going on jobs still in this country without safety gear. And persons asking employees to perform tasks without conducting safety job analysis and assessing the jobs. But what you're doing, what you are seeking to hasten to get that job done and to record a profit, you are putting the life of an individual at risk, the likelihood of an accident occurring and the severity of that accident. And when you analyze it, it can cause death. And what is the dollar value on my life? You can't put a dollar value on my life. You can't put a dollar value on the life that was lost in St. Lucie at the cement plant back then. You can't put a dollar value on no life. And that is why I endorse this legislation, the amendments to this legislation, because when I look at the regulations and also the legislation that was in place before, we will create a culture. If every single employer and employee adhere to the rules, safety and health at work rules, we will create a culture of safety in this country, a culture of discipline more so than anything else, and a culture that will lead to productivity. And I remember traveling in the north on mornings, and as I approached the gate to enter that lovely place where I cut my teeth and I learned a lot, I would see on a bulletin board 900 days before since the last lost time accident, or 400 days since the last minor accident. There's a saying, what gets measured gets done. And I am not recognizing anybody as a role model company, but I'm asking that every single company and employer, you don't have to create a bulletin board to measure, but you have to create that culture. Find a way to institute that culture of safety ahead of the culture of productivity, because the culture of safety will lead to productivity. Because when employers recognize that the environment in which they're operating in, they feel safe from injury and from harm, they will produce. That's the human being for you. They will produce. When you provide an environment that is conducive for productivity, whether through safety or whether through motivating employees, or treating them with dignity and respect, and I've lived it, I've seen productivity hit the roof. But when you refuse to provide the necessary PPE and ask a man to, and I can give you live cases, that section on Section 3 in the Act that speaks to fencing of equipment, that speaks to providing guide ropes. I lived through, again, don't refer to me as the accident manager back then or anything like that, or the unsafe manager, but I lived through again as operations manager in that place to see a young man, well, not so young man, he had to be in his 50s then. I am not so young, that is where I am now. Climb a cement mill on a guide rope, and he fell off the cement mill. I'm not sure if that case is still in court, but the member for St. George North, probably she knows about that case as well, because that worker was a member, a unionized worker, Barbados Workers Union. And that worker was at home for over 2 years. And when we analyze, no safety job analysis done, no safety job sheet done. Several things happen. And who's at fault? There's liability on the employer, there's liability on the employee. I'm no lawyer, I didn't go to court. But at the end of the day, if we had done what we were supposed to do because the systems were in place, man failed the system did not fail man. That is why I'm speaking about creating that culture of safety within the workplace. So that every day we come to work, we have to live it. And I will boldly say to companies, businesses, we have to begin to link productivity to safety. It happened to me. I could not see any bonus if I had a lost time accident or a death on a plant. I will get no bonus. So the reward and the recognition system must first and foremost factor in safety and health at work. And I am encouraging all organizations, all companies to go in that direction. And in that way, I guarantee you productivity would improve. But I ask organizations, employers, to provide the necessary safety gear, PPE we call it, personal protective equipment. Provide the necessary working spaces that are injury-free, reduce the risk and the likelihood of accidents. As we ask these men and women to produce on a daily basis, the onus is on us as employers to make sure that our places are safe. But this brings me to the portfolio, and I will wrap up shortly, the portfolio that I hold presently as Minister of Housing, Lands, and Maintenance. You know, being criticized a few days ago for comments that I made. And I will go back there again because we employed some 400 contractors recently to address the repairs and the rebuilds from Hurricane Elsa, damage sustained by many citizens across the length and breadth of this country. And, you know, I'm asking myself if on a daily basis, as these men and women work to put persons back into their homes, if they're indeed following the regulations or tenets of the Act that will ensure safety and health, good health for every single worker that fall under their portfolio as small contractors. And there's much work to be done in this country along those lines. And we have to create the policy. That is what we have here. This is a policy initiative. This is legislation. The amendment that would seek to provide all the necessary regulation to support good legislation. And I call them my contractors, to on a daily basis to examine how you go to work, how you deploy your workers, that they're indeed wearing the necessary personal and protective equipment that will protect them and allow them to continue to put bread on their table. Because when you leave home to go to work, you have your children to look after. That's why you are going to work. To be the man and the woman in the house, to pay the bills, to send to school these children that you have. And the onus is on you and I. I didn't take myself out of it. Government has brought legislation and regulations to ensure that the contractors follow the necessary guidelines, whether regulation, policy, initiatives to ensure their safety and also their workers' safety. And I guarantee, if we create a culture of safety as we seek to build these 10,000 homes, I guarantee you that we will be successful and we will not be looking to speak to losing a limb losing a life, or going home to tell a family member what I had to do years ago, that we have just lost a loved one. And I'm asking that we focus our energies there in an effort to have a successful project, what we call the silent revolution. But I go further and I join the member for St. George North, because it might not be covered in this legislation. And I spoke briefly to the member for St. Peter, who did an excellent job. I mean, he was exhaustive. I heard the member said he spoke extensive, but I am saying he touched on every single aspect of this legislation. And I'm asking for us to carry our thoughts environmentally, health-wise, and to go as far as I can go, as close as the Bell, but I can go as far as Rock Hall and St. Philip, where we have constructed houses on landfills. The environmental challenge that presents itself might not be covered in this bill, similar to what the member for St. George North articulated and represented her constituents exceptionally well. She's asking for a resolution to some of these problems, which might not be covered in this legislation, but you will agree with me in this chamber that safety is safety. Safety is safety. Whether it is safety at a workplace, it is safety in your home, or it is safety on the state lands, or it is safety in the air, it is still safety. And we as a government, we have a duty to ensure that every single aspect of governance, we operate in a safe way. So I, again, take my hats off to this government for leading the charge at Rock Hall. And I know some resolution will come to Lower State as we embark on our journey this week as a team in St. George on Wednesday and on Thursday. And I stand tall next to my colleague and running mate to ensure that this government do justice to the people of St. George North and to the people of St. George on the whole. And I commend the member for St. Peter again for this amendment, including the necessary regulations that will seek to bring more respectability to this piece of legislation, Safety and Health at Work Act. And I end again by calling on every single business in this country to put safety first. And when you put safety first and you have comfortable employees, you will have a productive sector where we can reap the necessary profits and indeed growth in this country. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable members to Michael East.
First of all, let me quote probably a social type that I normally do not quote, by the name of John F. Kennedy. When he was asked, what is the most important attribute that you believe is necessary in leadership? He said, courage. Courage. And I've seen it through the history of self-government, that we have had men who boast of their ability, the convictions, and they have been the most successful persons in holding office in this land. And I want to say today, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the Honourable member for St. Peter is probably one of the most courageous ministers of Labour I have known in my entire lifetime. And I think that is so important, because many ministers of Labour before always try to find compromise and seek solace in the arms of a traditional type in this country, while treating in the most brutal and vicious manner people of their own types, and could always find fault in what we have done as a people to each other, more so than finding fault of those people who, in my mind, can be, the history itself records that they are the greatest culprits on the face of the earth. And to talk in a courageous way, especially at a time when vicious super capitalism is being imposed on us, with regulations not just coming from the House of Assembly, but regulations coming from all kinds of international financial institutions, legislation being a response to what is happening in the international community. It is not easy for a minister of labor to speak with the courage and the clarity in which the Honourable Minister for Labor spoke this morning. I will keep saying that over and over again. That sometimes the Ministry of Labor comes across, not this one, as persons who are very docile, and sometimes they're not even registered in the minds or etched anywhere in the consciousness of the Barbadian public. So there's certain other ministries, high-profile ministries. But this morning, I think that the minister could have cut his speech halfway, because the impact on me and many others, while he was speaking, the whole membership was talking about the substance and the material facts that was coming out of his presentation. He just went a little longer and longer because it is sometimes necessary to constantly repeat in order for the general public of Barbados to fully appreciate what we're doing here. You know, these moments in time are very much like the moments in time 100 years ago. In the 1920s, discussions on the ground was, things are hard in Barbados, and people were migrating. And just before the 1920s, we had a 40,000 to 60,000 people because of hunger, hardship, all kinds of social tensions, migrated to Panama and Costa Rica and Cuba over 100 years ago. The migration to Panama was from 1914, but all up in the 1920s, people were still going to Panama, and this country was experiencing an imbalance in gender, where the majority of the people who went to Panama were males. And I always say, sir, thank God for the active nature of the black man in Barbados. This race has survived some hard times. So you had such names emerging as bastards and so on, because the few men that were around had to be very active, sir. So you had discussions on the ground. The social effects of it was half-brother, bastardization, all kinds of things. At a later date, we had to put legislation in place to respond to those things. So I'm seeing that order that we witnessed in the 1920s that gave rise to the uprising in the 1930s as well. And if we are not prudent, or if we have not learned anything from history, things might appear to be a little sporadic at this time, because you're seeing a form of rebellious behavior which might not be organized rebellious behavior, as what we saw in the 1930s, and what people now consider to be delinquency. People in the 1920s and 30s were describing it as wild boys. Even when the questions came before the Mons Commission, men were saying the wild boys. The same revolution that brought the changes in the 1930s, the legislature at the time was describing them as wild boys, including the aspirants of the hour. We're calling them wild boys. They were not listening to the voices of the people on the ground. And what is admirable and soundly rational is that the minister started his speech by taking us on a historic journey to let us see the time, to let us see the institutions that emerged in the time, to let us see the regulations and the bills that came to the House of Assembly at the time. And he was able to lodge it firmly in the contribution of the Barbados Labour Party in this early stage of its history, what we have done. And I heard him giving credit to the struggles of Clement Payne in the 1930s. He spoke about Doc Husbands, who he referred to as his a mentor from the constituency of St. Peter. But we also had people of great revolutionary thought defending the interests of labor in the form of Duncan O'Neill, Israel Lovell. And you had the external influences of Marcus Garvey in the system, which was suppressed and in some cases dismissed by the colonial minds of the time. But the reality is, those contributions, although not being able to identify in any material form, the non-material forms of the contribution of Garvey was very much a significant influence on the thoughts of the people of the hour. And everything that the minister put before us this morning tells us that you cannot ignore the importance of social legislation at this hour, because you might be very well sitting down on a volcano, which we don't want to wait until we see the features of the 1930s, but because of the foreseeability of the minister himself, started to put provisions in place, because those people must not continue to abuse us and be rewarded in the system for the abuse. Lots of people in Barbados don't want to say these things, so you get language couched in such a way because you don't want to be perceived as a pariah, dangerous in the system, and then suffer the consequences that I have suffered. Although people know that I am right, I will die saying that I am right. Because I've seen businessmen in this country who are perceived as the most successful businessmen, has ill-treated black boys throughout Barbados, ignored directions and rules and regulations in this country, placed on the statute books by governments, and then because of ill-gotten wealth, they've been able to bargain and in some cases use jurists in order to achieve even more wealth than they had at this specific time. And that's what I'm saying, courage. Courage to speak. And if you tell the truth, you don't have to fear any man. And when I made a little joke with the minister at break, sir, and I told him, you know, if you were making speeches of this kind and people had some peek into your inner self and knew that you possessed these qualities, then probably some of the jobs that you had before you became a minister, you would never have gotten those jobs. Barbados is like that. As you would believe that when a man speaks honestly about this society, people will respect that. But you always have to be tiptoeing or having the fear that if you speak truth, if you're not likely to become a victim in the circumstances. And you know, I don't like to criticize any profession but the universities keep putting out lots of people in the area of management. And in those programs of management, there are elements in the programs that is protective of capitalism. The social scientists now and the historians, the political scientists, none of those persons are not speaking as loudly as they ought to on these important public issues. So what you know is have the voice of the accountants, the voice of the people coming out to university. The university has produced 3 million students doing business administration a year, you know. And all of them speaking the same language, like parrots. No ideological assessment of anything. Learning structures of how to do accounts, and how to put 2 lines at the bottom where you finish, and you seal off the account, and carry forward and backward and all kinds of things right up a document. And even trying to learn elements of business law overnight. So this profession, I believe that there's an assignment probably coming from some international source. I've had the experience in Geneva 1 year of accidentally inviting me to a session. And these men were discussing the kind of educational system that is needed in the Western world. And I just said, don't say, look, this thing for me, daughter. Huh? Look where Pressy is. Well, of course, they didn't know that I was Ruby Black Boy. They probably believed that I was another black buffoon of Afro-Saxon nature in the room and felt elated because I was in the company of these people. They were looking at how we should go forward as a people in the Western world, the kind of education that is best suited. I saw it here in Barbados too. We had a man at the university, and he was doing everything that he could to wipe history off the curriculum at the University of the West Indies. Although at that time they were teaching colonial history, that they called West Indian history. They had West Indian history being taught up there, and they had nothing in it about Africa, but they had said about Britain, and they had said about Portugal and France. But it was called West Indian history, and people say, man, we know history, West Indian history. But no linkage with the African continent at all. So they're poisoning your mind. And then they send people out to teach this thing, people gobble it up. I say all of that because ideology is fundamental. When the leader of this party in the 19th century, prior to coming to the House of Assembly, he was rough against Colonel Wickham. So I am not going to fool you that he burned that way. He was anti-socialist, but on winning office, where he had to sit down and pay attention to the voices of the other men around him, including O'Neill, and including the same Colonel Wickham, who he later In fact, Clement Whitcomb actually had to run from this country because of what he was writing in newspapers and what occurred is because he had a very strong source in this land. But he and him, Sir Grantley Adams he wasn't Sir Grantley then, became very good friends because he recognized that the ideology of the day could not carry our people anywhere. And that what the socialists were saying, which later was reflected in the policies of the Barbados Workers' Union. He recognized that that was the correct track. That if he is to chart a future for our people, then he had to shift to a socialist view. My concern now is what is our view? Where are we going? How can a man do all of these wicked things? Most people in here don't support it. Most Barbadians don't support it. But any man gets the biggest contracts. For being mischievous. When you come here, you tell me that the man at MTW wrote him. You tell me town planning wrote him. He's a big man in this country now, carrying equally as much power of any prime minister anywhere in the region. So when a minister gets up and speaks the way the minister spoke this morning, they say he's a man of courage. I'm not looking for any cosmetic title. There's a real title that he deserves. And I just cited one example, but I could tell you other things. Where people did things in this country without a license to do these things that they were doing. And that's what I expect from the minister, that along with this bill being elevated to become an act, that we will see the officers who are responsible for enforcing the provisions within this bill, but soon will become an act. I would like to see these things being followed through. Because you want to have those girls being burnt up and through the street. I can understand that we inherit architecture, one-door architecture in places in Barbados, sometimes that you don't even see the customers, but the owners are some of the richest people in the land. I know that too. So who don't want to see that and who don't know that, sorry for them. Unfortunately, we can't bring the appropriate criminal legislation at present. You got labor legislation. I hope at a later date some criminal legislation will be applied as well. And a lot of them know more about the marijuana industry than the fellows out there that are asking for an opportunity to be part of the market of even sacramental marijuana. They ain't even asking to be part of the commercial market, sacramental marijuana, all little recreation. Better, you know what we're talking about. Right? A little sacramental marijuana, sir. Nothing wrong with that, sir. I mean, the government has demonstrated that they have an interest in doing so. I don't know what is responsible, what are the obstacles or encumbrances now that denying the government from going ahead with these policies. But I'm saying that it calls for in every ministry at this time. It cannot be business as usual. You have a massive unemployment problem. Just like you have a massive homeless problem, and landless problem, and hopelessness as well. It is our duty to give the people hope. And as I was speaking to one of my colleagues, I said, you can put all the icing or all the French colognes that you want to make it smell nice, but in reality, even the jobs that the people are receiving today, they don't feel an integral part of the labor market or integral part of the workforce. Lots of the work, if you can give it such a credit, the workers feel a sense of alienation from the production that they are responsible for. And lots of workers also feel that they are not properly rewarded. No, I'm not blaming any individual government, so who narrow-minded and want to relate to that fear, right? But I'm telling you that there's a vulgar super form of capitalism that is being imposed on us, even in the areas of technology. And when this technology was being sold, in small states that can't even make a transistor radio, want to pretend that they're so bright and skillful, technologically savvy. And I was bringing a whole set of people down on the harbor to operate a basic computer. And people down here feel that they're real good. You go put a computer, press a few buttons, and so on. But these people plan things. You had lots of debates about all types of treatment that was given to people during the COVID period. We were engaged in a debate. I don't know nothing about what the people are talking about. That is the way how capitalism functions. Lots of people being displaced in labor markets across the Western world. You'll be hearing debates going on about if people have plans of reducing the population of the world by millions of people by a specific time. You only read about 2 lines in a magazine or a newspaper about these things. Is there any truth in this? So we have a commitment to our people that we must call a spade a spade. I am not saying that you don't have to have strategic approaches and that some people know what is true or what is not true, but they believe it is expeditious at a specific time to take a special form of action because it might got certain benefits. But then all of us must be fully aware of what the action is and why the action. And that is why this morning I kept saying to myself, this is the way I believe a minister ought to speak to us who are not as fortunate as others. Unless I better on the minister somewhere in town, because apparently he knows a lot about town life. And on occasions he came in here and he was saying about how lively how lively things are in Speightstown, and he was comparing it with Nelson Street and Baxter Road. I don't know how he knows about all these things, but he's an interactionist. He's a decent interactionist. So he from time he knows about these things better than me. And I eat lunch in Nelson Street every day. But he knows the environment that he's in. He knows it well. And sir, look, this thing about health and safety, I don't want to say anything because I don't have much evidence yet But hopefully I don't go to talk about the Chinese, you know. Because I know that the interest of the Chinese is loans being available at lower rates. But I got some evidence. I was supposed to be up in St. Philip for a Chinese man up there, and going to the minister on the hand, that they're doing some foolishness. But he got COVID down, so I want to see, right? But we must keep our eyes on all these things. The minister that is responsible for labor has to deal with these things and strike a balance. You're not like me. God say if you clean up, if you dirty up the beach, you know you dump it, and you're wrong. You make make clean. And I tell you straight, anybody here could talk about crazy judicial action or not. I say make clean. And when tomorrow morning coming back by the beach to see it, start behind the Hilton, and you go right down to the back of the Radisson. Clean all down there, take out everything carefully, white boy, black boy, clean up the place. Well, I don't know. People tell me they pay the price for that stupidness, right? And then you got other people doing things in this country. Look, labor is black in Barbados, though. We don't want to get it straight. Labor is black in Barbados. They got who? You ever see a white man driving a sanitation truck? Yeah, you ever see a white man cutting cans, or you see standing in Keiki with a car hat? The variable of class is the Barbadian conversation. And although no white man is in here, or white woman, the conversation in Barbados is class. And if you talk to people that purport to be sensible with 3 degrees from the University of West Indies, they say we ain't gotten a class issue in Barbados. Yet, I know about drugs. Yet, I know where the slave laws were put together. I know who made the slave laws. And I know who the slave laws were inflicted and imposed on. But the boy want me to talk about that. Even my best colleagues run if they hear me talking these things. What are they trying to do? This is the reality that we have to face. And this is a minister that has to take all of those things into consideration, that when he stands up on a principle in any amendment to safety, a health act, any form of social legislation, anything about labor legislation, he needs the support, at least, of his colleagues in here. Or not somebody going behind his back and asking what it is that he's doing where he should be a minister. I am not strong, but my brother, you have a shoulder to lean on. I'll support you always. But I am very, very, very serious. I respect what you did this morning. I could have talked for 60 hours, but you said enough in the first hour that I consider the presentation consummate enough that every sensible black man in this country, a woman, so free, proud that you're the Minister of Labor in this country today.
You all remember, sir, wind up.
Yes, sir.
All wind down.
I just think that I should mention, sir, just answer to
I just telling you the time, sir.
Yes, sir.
You know, the good old days, you had your problems, sir, with landing a helicopter, and you're still doing it.
But the environment is a little rough now. Sir, I just want to also say that what the minister has done today, I'm sure that the union would have been addressing some of these things over the last few years. And this party will always work along with the Barbados Workers Union. We have always put in place the Temporary Freehold Person Act, the Vocational Pay, many different acts of social legislation that relate to the Social Security Act. All of those acts the Barbados Labour Party put in place. So it's somehow keeping in trend with what we have been doing since the 1940s, more so than the 1930s, because when the party was established, we were at the end of the 1930s. But we have done well, and I want the Barbados Workers Union to feel free to flex some muscle in this country when it comes to what is happening to workers again. As I said, what was happening 100 years ago, I am now seeing a rebirth of those things. The union, this thing about social partners, I mean, it is all, I got to think, and capital, feel that it must influence. I know the union, on the Barbados Workers, you don't understand this. Feel they can flex muscles and they can get things resolved in a way that will please many people across Barbados. I want to see the union begin to ask the realities, though. What about some increments? What are even better conditions in the workplace? We have to force people to respond to us in a favorable way. Business thought and economics cannot shape the future of the interests of labor.
I remember watch the clock. The clock
Yes,
is
sir,
against you.
I'm coming home, but
The clock
the last paragraph
is against you. I remember.
I try to capture everything. Sir, I want to appreciate the time. I was feeling my way through as much as I can, and I never expected to get this far in my journey. But I want to compliment the minister for the amendments which he brought before this House of Assembly today. I want to compliment all the officers, which I know some of them personally. They're equally as compassionate about concerns of labor as I am. And sir, I hope that we will continue to see some more progressive legislation brought before the House Assembly at this particular juncture in our history.
Honourable Member for St. Philip North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is probably one of the most informative sessions thus far. I had a lesson of history ranging from St. Peter to Panama and back. The only thing that was missing today was King John and Poor Becca. But I appreciate the honourable member's contribution. I can only congratulate the honourable member for St. Peter on his excellent presentation. 2 hours long or so, but it was informative, and that does not come easily for me to say, so I mean it from the bottom of my heart. What I do appreciate from the honourable member is that he admitted that the government was not quite ready in terms of the legislation. We are not quite ready ourselves. There's work to be done in fixing our own house. But so far, I think the comments and the approach to it is good. Just a few thoughts I had in my head. He spoke about the workstations at work, and me, in my position, I still hold dear to my professional position as a medical doctor. Especially over the COVID period, we have seen a lot of carpal tunnel syndrome, as he spoke of, overuse injury, as he also spoke of, becoming the doctor that he is. Good job. Largely because people were asked to work from home. So in some circumstances, in most circumstances, when questioned, members of the workforce were working from their dining room tables, as he said, in the bedrooms, on their bed, and it's not quite conducive to health and safety. The question is that I want to ask is if in some cases the responsibility will not fall on the employer to ensure that working space, even if it were at home, is adequate and safe. Well, I say this because I am aware of at least one business who has completely closed down, since COVID, opting to have their workers work exclusively from home. So this is less rent, no electricity bill, no water bill. Why can't the resources saved on that end be placed into making employees comfortable at home by simple provisions of chairs and tables, adequate computer stations, and so on? I think it would be helpful if they would do that, and I don't expect complaints if they're saving in the long run. This is where the world is going now. Some jurisdictions, or at least one, are working a 4-day week. So we need to get on board with the sign of the times in that sense. The other thing I want to bring up, the Honourable Member St. Peter again spoke about the campus trends issue, which my heart goes out to the families of those people. It still does. And I see where the error was, and several businesses, I remember there was it probably still stands, an old business way back in town, and a famous one too, and they had one exit. Not sure if there was a fire escape, but one exit. And my father was in that line of work in terms of national insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And this particular business owner, when asked about why this is happening and why is it continued, and I know this government will not fall in line with it, she made the statement, I shouldn't say she or he, made the statement that every government has a price. In essence, to say that she got away with it with some coppers. And I'm happy to say it wasn't in our time, as far as I can remember, as my memory goes back. But this legislation, or this amendment to the bill, proves to me that we mean business, and things like that cannot happen by way of law. But one of the questions I have, we know about the reordering of tongue and so on. If a fire does break out, what provisions do we have in terms of a fire service to reach the destination in the middle of town adequately? I worry about that. Because we have to remember that town is a place with traffic almost all day, sometimes to some extent at night. I worry about how we access spaces in town without a nearby fire station. And it does not only apply to the town areas. We have to be mindful of that going forward in terms of country planning, approvals, and so on. The nearness of help, fire stations, ambulance service, which is doing a good job, if I do say so, on behalf of the Minister of Health as well. But these are things we have to bear in mind when we speak about the one-door shops. And these are things that I think we need to be conscious of. There are other health and safety issues that are not as obvious or not as palpable as something like the campus trends issue. And I speak but there's evidence of things unseen in this circumstance. I speak here in terms of mental health issues with respect to health and safety, and I put it in this bracket on purpose. And I'll give you an example that I have. I have a patient that I've been fighting with for the last perhaps 2 years, and if she will forgive me for mentioning her, she will know who I mean. But I have been fighting with her and her workplace for about 2 years with respect to her. This is a lady that had the unfortunate circumstance of losing a child, her only child. And she works in an institution where she deals with the public sometimes in emergency areas. And it's not really of her benefit health-wise to sit where she sits. I have written several letters on the advice, even so, of the Honourable Member for St. Peter, begging her workplace, begging her bosses to shift her. She was willing to work. She still is willing to work, begging her bosses to shift her for her own mental health, her own health. And it fell on deaf ear. It ended up in some bin. I wrote at least 3 letters. It's okay to say doctors need to take the responsibility to report these things. But I'm happy that the Honourable Member, I can't remember if it was here or a previous meeting, stated that it's the onus on the doctor to report these things. But these are some of the barriers that we face. We write several letters asking that the workstations be adjusted, asking that the person be placed in another area at work, and it falls on deaf ear. We need to put our foot down in this instance and ensure that people are taken care of. You might not be able to see asthma in these people, but there's major depression, especially as a result after COVID, we're seeing even more of it. This affects people's performance at work, hence a bad performance appraisal, and then all hell breaks loose. And then, of course, I cannot speak about the sick building syndrome. And I must say here that I'm particularly proud of the Parliament of Barbados and the Clerk of Parliament and whoever the other players are ensuring that this building is safe for us, at least most of it is safe for us to work in and to appear here a minimum of once a week. But there are other areas of the government service and private service that we need to consider with respect to sick building syndrome. And are we ready to tackle this beast? It is a big one, it's a big beast with horns and all the lot, but we need to be ready to tackle it. Right now, the proof of burden lies with the employee in this case. And I know this full well. You have to more or less prove that these things affect you to get somebody to listen. And I don't find this is good enough. And this exists in even the hospital. We have areas in the building. We are working on it assiduously to see how we can fix it. But even in the hospital, there's anecdotal evidence. We have people dying of cancer in several buildings. I can name a few. I don't want to do so now. And I can't prove it. Schools, we know the whole lot of it. Departments in certain buildings where I can pick out 4 people in a little room and 3 of the 4 have died of cancer. These are things that we need to take really, really, really seriously. And the step that we have made with respect to this building gives me hope. And I trust that this will be done. The next thing I want to speak of is the disposal of hazardous waste. The Honourable Member did not mention it specifically, but this is also an area of hazard for many employees and institutions. The QEH, Queen Elizabeth Hospital being one of them, University of West Indies being one of them. What used to happen, and I hope my voice travels to somebody who may help in this situation. It may not necessarily be government, but there must be somebody in the hearing of my voice that can help this. Right now, certain institutions, the labs in the QEH, private labs, University of West Indies, some schools for that matter, I wrote a whole list down, some schools for that matter, industrial waste. Right now, it is stored in a particular area, and the last shipment out from somebody overseas was some 10 years ago. I think 2010 was the last time. These are hazards that we can ill afford in our workplaces. So I'm praying that somebody hears me and we as a government can work towards disposal of this hazardous waste in the near future. And the other thing, there are lots of things that are going through my head, but I picked out a few. With respect to the hazardous waste, I must compliment, going from there, I must compliment the Honourable Member and the Cabinet of Barbados for insisting that there are routine medical checks, for instance, on the gas station attendants. I know there exists routine, meaning yearly medical checks on sanitation workers, for instance. There are some areas in the hospital, but that's a hospital, so that can't be too hard to institute. But I applaud that effort with respect to seeing that people are checked up for certain illnesses once they're exposed to these areas. And as I said before, this area, health and safety, encompasses some of the things we don't even think of. We have to think of things like extended working hours where it becomes unsafe. And I'll give you the example that's near and dear to me because I went through it. A medical intern, for instance, in Barbados at our QEH, and this is education, not so much QEH, is required every few days, sometimes every 2 days, sometimes every 3 days, sometimes every 4 days if you're lucky, to work a minimum of 36 hours straight. When you're looking at taking care of ill people, this is a dangerous, and I will admit here that I almost got in trouble because of fatigue in the hospital. I wrote the wrong dose, and luckily my senior was there to double check behind me, but these are real issues that we have to attend to, especially now the hospital is in the media all over the place. So something needs to be done about extended working hours in any institution, not necessarily QEH. There's often overtime. There's a ticklish issue for me, But some people are required to work overtime to get home, and because somebody calls in sick and so on, the overtime comes in there, so they end up working much longer than they should. So you have issues with safe driving. It extends so far. It's unbelievable, but this is an area that needs attention. One of the things I want to speak of too, and I have to put a plug here for the women of Barbados. The honourable member for St. Michael North. East, sorry, thank you. Out of the chair for too long, Honourable Mrs. Speaker. He mentioned what he said, there's an imbalance of gender, and I tapped my desk to him. There is an imbalance of gender when it comes to health and safety. And I don't necessarily mean ill health here, but I spoke about this in cabinet when I first got in Parliament. There's a wish, I guess, of mine. In Parliament, whereby right now there is a paucity of space for women to breastfeed in the workplace. There's no space for women to express milk in the workplace, no provision for women to store said milk expressed. We have to remember that. You're speaking about pregnant women here. There are some employers that are unscrupulous. Pregnant women are given shifts at night to work. They're made to stand on their feet all day. This is really not acceptable, at least not in my world. And the sad part is some of these employers are women who have children that fail to understand that these are things that we need. I've advocated for a creche. Women carry, whether y'all like to hear it or not, gentlemen, women carry the brunt of the household. In terms of taking care of children, and whether y'all would like to admit it or not, that is a woman's job most of the time. There is no provision in most workplaces. I don't even want to give a percentage, but I know minority of workplaces offer it, where women can bring their children to work, and we should have learned this from the whole COVID thing, and the online school and everything. No real provision for parents to bring, I give you a little plug, for parents to bring their children to work while they are working, no place of safety. Now the schools, once upon a time, you sent your child to school in knowing that they're safe. We just heard the other day that a child was taken from the premises of one of the schools and molested. There is real fear in me on something like that. I get on the phone as soon as 2 o'clock comes to make sure mine is safe. We need to make space in the future. I'm not talking about tomorrow, but I mean within the next short few years, where a provision is made through town country planning, new buildings, extensions of buildings, whatever, so that these provisions can be put in place. The issue of maternity leave, and this is one of the things that has come to me over the last 2 years. I have some antenatal mothers that were forced, usually in the bank system, if not only the bank system, they were forced to take maternity leave when they were not ready. Right now in Barbados, we are given 3 months maternity leave, which I really think should be more, but that's for another time. And there are banks in the island that force women to take maternity leave 6 weeks before they want to, which means you have 6 weeks at home, 12 weeks at home. You have to go back to work when this child is only 6 weeks old. I did it, but not everybody can do it. I need somebody to look into this. There are private institutions that are insisting that women take maternity leave when they're well and able to work. These are things that bite me a little bit. But health and safety requires a lot more in-depth, and it will take time. I appreciate it. I had a few instances in the same banking institutions where women and men are asked to lift heavy bags of coins daily. I'm seeing back injuries, wrist injuries. I shouldn't say I was. Back injuries, wrist injuries, all of these things, because they're made to do that. And I really and truly think they can do better. And some of these extent, I know the honourable member mentioned, and I know he likes that bandwagon that white businesses treat their black employees badly, a lot of them. In my experience, I have not found that. I have found that people that look like me treat their employees real bad. Really bad. And sometimes it goes the other way around. Some white employees treat their employees exceptionally well. So I don't know if it's a matter, and he's smiling because he's going to attack me after this, but that's all right. We're all good friends. We're all good friends here. And we need to get a holistic view of it where it is not a matter of race or culture, that we just treat our employees as they should be, I, like the Honourable Member for St. Peter, congratulate the Honourable Members for St. Philip South with respect to the toilet facilities for the farm workers. And I had, right before that had started, I had said in Parliament, I mentioned that, but I also mentioned facilities for people that work on the road, our bus drivers, for instance, especially the females. We don't know how men work. We don't like it, but y'all do it. It's a little hard for women to do that. I would like to see, apart from the parks and beaches that have facilities, bus drivers are required to work in several different places, and when nature calls, it calling hard. You can't really wait to get there. I would like to see spot bathrooms, spot toilets around the island to accommodate these people that work for several hours on the road. And you have men, now the retirement age is even higher, you have men with large prostates, some probably in here, that need to urinate quickly at certain times, like no. And I still look forward to seeing that agricultural toilet idea built out into the rest of Barbados. Sometimes tourists have to stop. And the bushes don't really look good on us, ain't cute, as they say. With this, I want to say, please remember that there are offshore companies, whether they're call centers. Those are the ones that I'm more familiar with in terms of employees getting a fair shake. Remember the offshore companies in terms of how they treat their employees, in terms of the hours they work, in terms of their being required to sit for long hours without breaks. I know it's in our laws, but things happen. Bear that in mind, Honourable Member for St. Peter, when you go over all of this again. And the same offshore companies, signs, the staff work for very little money. If they're out missing from work for one day, Mr. Speaker, one day, they have to come and spend money at a doctor to get a certificate. One day. Sometimes that's half the pay packet. These things need to be looked into in terms of labor. So, and going on from here, wrapping up just now, I always look on the side of the employers. I always look on the underdog in situations like this. There needs to be, if there isn't already, protection for the employers. We have employees that are bright and are knowledgeable about the laws, but we all know this is a world of suits. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that there are lawsuits out there. We are becoming very Americanized or westernized, whatever, where although the employer puts everything in place, the employee knows their rights. I would hate to see people falling down at work and they put quotation marks on that, and then the employer is asked to account. Yes, there's liability insurance. Maybe we need to encourage employers to make sure they have this type of insurance. We need to encourage employers to see that there, and to go back a little bit, to see that their employees are covered. Those who work in hazardous jobs are covered by insurance. It's not always that an employer can pay for everything. So make sure that a part of the salary, along with what the employer can contribute, is put aside for insurance just in case these things happen. So that's the question of insurance, that's the question of sabotage from workplaces. So somebody needs to be mindful of the employers and what the liability means on their behalf. So let's make sure I have everything. So while I support the bill, I really do. That Tuara's speech was wonderful. I listened to all of it. I want us to be really proactive here. I want us not to sit on this, because I suppose many governments have spoken with respect to health and safety in the workplace, etc. I would hate to see it sit on and not enacted or at least not start the process. Legislation is one thing. Activating it on the outside is a whole different story. And I know this from other areas of my work. We have instances where, for instance, pharmacy, we know that people are bringing in counterfeit stuff. We know that people are stocking over-the-counter drugs that should not be over-the-counter drugs. But when you want to raid these places, police won't come out, no charges to be. So it's one thing to have things in legislation, a whole next another, as business said, next another ball game to act on it and make sure that these things are implemented. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I am grateful for your ear. Me and an honourable member for St. Michael, was it East? We'll have a discussion after, but I love him dearly. I even miss that side of the room. I really miss that side of the room. This is not a message for the Prime Minister to put me back, but I really miss that side of the room. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Honourable member for St. James Central. Your mic is on, sir?
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you very much. I do not intend to delay your House exceptionally long on this matter. I want to begin by echoing the sentiments that I believe have been expressed by virtually everyone who has preceded me, except for the minister himself who piloted the bill, by congratulating him, sir, not only on the tone, but on the substance of that which he presented to this House. I also feel constrained and compelled, sir, to speak in similar vein about the contribution of the Honourable Member for St. George North, who I think very adequately represented the interests of Labour as it must impact on a debate such as this. And Mr. Speaker, sir, after being in this place for now nearly 19 years, one has seen debates of this type come and go. I think, sir, however, today's debate has given us an opportunity to bring into sharper or more sharp focus than I can recall ever before the nature of the challenge, the grievous challenge which confronts this country with respect to the question of safety and health at work. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I can only say that I hope, in similar vein to she who just took her seat, that this is the beginning of a serious conversation which this country will have. Now, sir, part of the reality that we have to face, in my judgment, and let me say to you that after having listened to the Honourable Member for St. Michael East, who spoke adequately and accurately with respect to the social and economic issues related to this question of safety and health at work. And as I indicated after listening to part of the presentation, because I could not listen to all, of the Honourable Minister who piloted the bill, and indeed the Honourable Member for St. George North. Sir, I honestly feel that it would be derelict in duty if I, as Minister with responsibility with oversight, Senior Minister with oversight responsibility for the productive sector in Barbados, which by definition must include private enterprise and commercial activity, did not lend my voice to this debate and do so with the clearest of conscience. I feel, Mr. Speaker, that Barbados has done itself a terrible disservice by not having a robust conversation on this particular issue and on issues which are immediately related to it in a more detailed way at a previous time. As I've said, sir, I've been in this place now for nearly 2 decades, and I have seen the passing conversations, if I could put it that way, on labor-related matters in general and health and safety at work in particular. I recall well after the sad and I almost use a word I would not want to use to describe it, but after the incident in Swan Street, sir, where all of those young people lost their lives
To the streets.
to the street, lost their lives needlessly. I remember, sir, the almost knee-jerk reaction of the government of the time and the expected hue and cry, the expected words that were uttered. The follow-up was de minimis, virtually nothing. And Mr. Speaker, sir, before that, there were other instances. And I came to this place, sir, having practiced law in Barbados and having spent a lot of time dealing with matters relating to persons who suffered bodily injury in the workplace. I've listened to one or two speeches in here today, sir, which reflect on the reality of what has happened in this country to a number of people, including fatal accidents arising from neglect, dereliction of duty on the part of employers. Quite frankly, sir, a chronic absence of basic humanity in the way in which Barbadians who are employers treat to other Barbadians. And let me hasten to add, sir, that that is not to say it can be encapsulated only with respect to the question of the race of the employer, because there are black Barbadians who have treated black Barbadians with the same degree of dereliction of duty. It is, sir, quite frankly, an atrocious situation, and it is, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael East has captured it, a question of how we see this matter called class in this country. Because there are those who seem to feel that because they are owners of capital, that they do not have to treat to those that they employ as though they are human beings with equal standing in the eyes of God or in the eyes of the fellow citizens in this country. Corners are cut, sir, and have been cut. And unless we take this matter very seriously and continue to have this national conversation, corners will continue to be cut. And a range of hazards, we all know, have existed in Barbados for a long time, confronting persons in the workplace. And many of them, sir, have been the consequence of significant types of injury and accident, the consequence of a lot of money being paid out by way of compensation to persons who are rendered disabled, or in the cases of estates who have to benefit as a result of a fatal accident. And Mr. Speaker, sir, there seems never to be an understanding that this is a matter that has to be brought to heel. Safety, in my judgment, sir, leads obviously to the prevention of accidents. The hazards are wide. They range from heavy machinery and the use of heavy machinery, and very often, sir, the absence of rules in the industrial place for the operation of the heavy machinery. And if in fact the rules do exist, very often, sir, the rules exist in such, or are enforced and applied in such a manner as to compromise the worker, so that the rules exist and the worker is supposed to be wearing a certain type of body protective equipment, but the body protective equipment is not purchased and is not to be found in the workplace. And it seems as though it is an element of satisfaction to be found to point the finger after the worker has suffered a dismemberment of his hand or part of his hand, point the finger of accusation and blame at the worker. You should have known better. There was something up on the wall saying you can't operate the machinery this way. And then when you drill down deep, months after, it is revealed that there is no proper equipment in the workplace, sir. These things impact on the productivity of the country. Very often that individual may be the only individual who is earning money in the household. They don't stop to think about these things. And I'm not going to say here, sir, that you can just, with one broad brush, lambaste the entire private sector of the country, because quite to the contrary, there are some aspects of the Barbados private sector who tried their best to get this right. But as in all things, sir, you have those who are diligent, and you have those who are not so diligent. And that is why I feel we have to have a very mature conversation about this, sir, because the usage of harmful materials, as I said, the heavy machinery, and that is the general But I have seen in the courts of Barbados, sir, injury to people as a result of constant and prolonged abuse by exposure to loud noise. I've come across a case, sir, where it is the lighting conditions within which the people were forced to work. You know, Mr. Speaker, sir, we know equally, and have to be candid about this, that government itself, throughout the annals of history of this country, has not been without blame either. And so if you're going to have a conversation of this nature, it has to be a holistic conversation involving all of Barbados. The Honourable Member for St. George North would know from her position as General Secretary of the Barbados Workers' Union of that which I speak. That there are departments of the government of Barbados which within the last, certainly maybe within the last 15 years or so, would have had people still being exposed to asbestos. There are people in Barbados, sir, who have contracted mesothelioma as a result of the exposure, sir, in their line of work. We therefore cannot only have a discussion about the way in which the private sector operates and not also look at the way in which government itself has operated, and more holistically look at how we can have, as I said, the national conversation to bring a national commitment to ensure that this critical issue of how Barbadian man and woman treats their fellow man and woman in the workplace with regard to safety and health is something that this country takes seriously at long last. I have, sir, or had rather, when he was more able-bodied, a right-hand man in my constituency who I could rely on to do virtually, offer any form of assistance in the course of the general election campaign. Along came my friend from St. James South and carried him away from me. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that one of the challenges that he confronted was an injury in the workplace which rendered him in a situation where he had a severe hernia. Part of the challenge was, however, and I say this is a question of productivity, ultimately, upward mobility in his job, in his workplace, was compromised. He, sir, could not get, because of the challenges in the last administration with regard to the function of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, could not get medical care that he required to treat to the matter, Mr. Speaker, sir, and could not therefore support the family. And therefore you have a question again of the productivity being impacted. And you take that one example, and I'm sure each of us in here can tell you of an example that they know of, and you multiply it across every district of this country, sir, and you understand the severe nature of the challenge that we are confronting and which we have to wrestle to the ground. And there are a number of things, sir, which I would want to see being done in workplaces in Barbados that really cost no money either to the employer, if the employer is in the private sector, or quite frankly to the Crown. And I see that the Minister of Finance is in his chair. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, there must be a thing called ease of reporting. And I would want to think that all of us as Barbadians would want to make sure that if we employ somebody, if you have a housekeeper home at you, if you have, Mr. Speaker, somebody working in a barber shop, if you have somebody working in a factory, sir, there must be some arrangement that you could put in place to make sure that if injury takes place, you can have an ease within which the report can be made and that the follow-through can take place. That is not asking too much. But in almost every case that I can think of, there is a challenge in terms of being able to get the individual who is injured to a place where that individual, sir, is able to make a report and the report be followed through on, and that report be said to be a report that is treated with clarity. Now, why should that be? There's no logical reason for that to be. And as I said, everybody is not to be daubed with that brush. That is not the case with every single one. But, sir, it happens far too often. And it reflects, in my judgment, part of a psyche in this country, where it says that the employer really don't matter that much. And this is something that we have to confront and that we have to overcome. Because we are talking not only about a fellow human being, not only in most cases about a fellow Barbadian, but Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to understand that an investment in your employer is not a cost per se, it is an investment in the well-being of your business. And that is something, sir, that does not seem to get through. Pardon? In your employee, investment in your employee. The other thing, sir, is that there has to be a serious willingness for us now to embrace, without the pressure of a trade union coming into your place, pro-worker safety policies. I do not know that the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union should have to have her officer or she herself bang down my door in order for me to come to Christian understanding that what I am doing should be done in an environment where safety and well-being of the worker is looked at. Nor, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I take up from where the Honourable Member for St. Philip North left off, nor do I know that outside of the realm of immediate health and safety, should there be the basic human comfort to the individual not being taken into consideration by an employer. But if you read, sir, the records of the Daily News, in the month of August, I believe it would have been, of the year 2019, you will see that your humble servant, who then carried the capacity of Minister of International Transport, was invited to attend a church service by Grantley Adams International Airport, celebrating Aviation Week or some such. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I went there with the greatest possible reluctance because I knew that I had asked the management of the airport, as it then was, from the day I became the minister, not the day I became, the day after I became, when I took a visit up there, and the security guards at, I think it is gate 3, would have stopped me and said, Minister, we need to talk to you. We have a problem that we can't get fixed. All along the length of the airport runway, there are guard stops, guard huts, checkpoints, because you have gates of entry. And at each particular gate, there are both men and women working, very often women working. Oh, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is no bathroom. And the airport, that airport got a 3-mile-long runway. And those ladies, sir, had to pick up a phone and call for somebody to come because of the fact that they have the monthlies. They got a call and ask a man to come to carry you to a central location to use a bathroom facility, to get an element of privacy in your place of work. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, they had to make a phone call because I want to relieve myself. The bodily functions need to take place, sir. And that went on, sir, from long before I was there. So when I have not been heard repeatedly, because again, I say that there is there's a thought process which suggests that there's a hierarchy of needs. And that the basic needs of ordinary human beings, if you carry the title employee, especially if you are an employee at the so-called lower rung of the social economic ladder, does not matter fundamentally in Barbados. And that, sir, has to be stamped out. So I'm not just saying this here and now. So when I made the mistake of insisting that I come to the church service, I said, well, I'm going to go to the church service and say what is on my mind and why I didn't want to come. So I said in the house of the Lord that it was a most objectionable thing that working class black women who are security guards at Grantley Adams International Airport in the year 2018 and 19, and obviously before, could not get access to a bathroom facility. But you know, sir, that was Sunday. Monday by 12 o'clock, the same management that found it difficult to move with alacrity had started work on a bathroom facility. We should not in this country have to have serious confrontation about matters which are basic in terms of the needs and elementary concepts of well-being of employees. So that pro-worker safety policy, sir, to me, should be something that is instinctive. And I want, therefore, if I could say anything that the private sector chooses to hold on to, and government too, it would be this. Now let us now forget for a little while all of the social antagonisms that the Honourable Member for St. Michael East has reminded us exist in Barbados. Let us forget about the class conflict and the class contradiction in this country, and let us talk to one another as brothers and sisters in Barbados. How would you want to be treated if you were in this set of circumstances? And I believe, sir, that can take us a long way towards recognizing that some basic principles can be put in place without us having to make heavy weather. But, sir, make heavy weather out of it, sometimes you have to do. Which is why I am so proud of the Honourable Member for St. Peter for piloting this legislation in the way he did, and the substance of the legislation, which I must say, sir, has begun to take us on a journey that we needed to take for a long time. And I am satisfied, sir, that this is but the first few steps, because more of this type has to come in order to ensure that the economy of Barbados and the society of Barbados reflects a certain level of equality across the board. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are some things that obviously we have to focus upon. The conditions of labor are inextricably bound up with the productivity of the country. It has been said that a worker who is happy is a worker who is prepared to give of his all and give of his best. And so it makes it's good sense, I would think, and good judgment for us to be doing our best to ensure that our workers are comfortable wheresoever and howsoever they're employed. Mr. Speaker, sir, the difficulty is that economic circumstances require us to have a balance. And that balance has to be obviously between capital on one hand and labor. As I say to you, I take the philosophical position that investment in the well-being of workers is not just simply a matter of cost, but it is, sir, an investment in your own enterprise. And the productivity aspect of this, sir, is at the back part of my mind, because human beings matter, and the single most vital aspect of any investment should be the human beings who are employed to work with you. But I want to say this, sir. We cannot have this discussion in this place without confronting some of the attendant ills. And they don't only begin and end in the workplace. When a person is injured, sir, and that injury has to be attended to, and they're to get some sort of benefit, whether that benefit is a financial benefit, sir, or any other type of benefit, usually the requirement is to have some independent medical evidence of what the injury is about. It may come as a surprise to most speakers in many parliaments, sir, but it cannot come as a surprise to you because of the job that you do when you're not in here, that one of the hardest things to do in Barbados today is to get a medical report out of the hands of certain doctors in this country. Don't laugh. I mean, don't say so. But it is a fact. It is an empirical fact that one of the hardest things to do is to prize a medical report out of the hands of certain physicians in Barbados, sir.
Sometimes you wait 5 and 6 years, sir.
5 and 6 years to get a medical report. In fact, there have been cases that by the time the medical report come, the funeral had taken place. And ask yourself, at what price to the human being and his family? At what price to the dependents, Mr. Speaker, sir? Does that aspect of the dereliction of duty come? But we have to have that conversation too. Because I listened carefully to the submissions of honorable members. I must say, I felt proud to be part of a government that is speaking in this way to this fundamental and burning issue that has been confronting Barbadians perhaps from the time there was a Barbados. But Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to look at it holistically. Industrial accidents take place, and in order for the person who is the victim of the accident, I heard the Honourable Member the Honourable Member for St. George South talk about the accident that took place at Arawak when he was there. Well, you will obviously need to have, sir, the medical reports in order to be able to make sure that there's some forward movement in terms of bringing resolution, or not resolution, compensation. And the longer it takes, sir, the harder it becomes. But above and beyond that, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's this tendency for some employers in this country to feel that they can treat the rules as though they do not exist. I have, again, to agree with the submissions made by the Honourable Member for St. George North. Because, and I think she pointed out, sir, an example that had nothing to do with the white race. It had to do with flagrant abuse of rules by an employer and a businessman who feels that he can get away with whatever he feels get away with in the country because he has people believing that he has the air of big people in Barbados and that he can walk about and do as he likes in Barbados. And when he tried to do it in my constituency, sir, and I had to confront him on the matter, he said that I am standing in the way of a small black man. To which I replied, cry your crocodile tears some more, because whether you are small or big, black or white or Indian, or any other color of the rainbow, Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is that if they got town and country planning requirements, and you feel that you're going to go in Bennett's or go in Arch Hall, about black people down in there, that come and vote for me in their hundreds, you got to think again, Skipper. You will do it over my dead body. I ain't care how big your backing is, Star. I do not care how big your backing is, Star. And we have to confront them in whatever shape they come, Mr. Speaker, sir, because it is not just the breaches of town planning. There are people in the construction sector in Barbados, let's get real. This is why I said there's a holistic conversation that the country now has to have. Why should your next door neighbor, Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central, why should a gentleman who lives a stone's throw from you be having his wages cut in the construction sector because of the fact that an employer has decided that he's going to deduct retention money from his pay pack? Now, the whole concept of retention money is that I'm holding on to some payments at the tail end of the contract until I am satisfied that the work that you have done as the contractor has been adequately dealt with and discharged. But that ain't got nothing to do with me as the worker. That ain't got nothing to do with me as the person who is employed. And if it is that retention money in the end has to be taken away, you can't unilaterally decide that you're going to cut my salary, my wages. But that is happening in this Barbados and yours, Mr. Speaker, sir. And they don't want you to say nothing about that. That's why I say I would be derelict in my duty as a minister with oversight responsibility for the productive sector, not to speak holistically, not only about the good, but also about the bad. Because it cannot be that there are some contractors who are doing it the honest way, the right way, the correct and proper way, following the rules, and then they have to compete against men for a government contract, mind you, for a government contract, when the men they're competing against are shabbily treating Barbadian workers, undermining them at the heart of the household by taking away money from them under wrongful, on wrongful basis, and under false pretenses too, quite frankly. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, these are things that we have, as I said, to solve by way of a national conversation, because they go to the core of what Barbados is. We like to talk about this is who we are. Well, let us hold up the mirror and look at what and who we are, sir. The denial in the tourism sector. In some places in the tourism sector today, there are those people in the hospitality sector of Barbados. I know whereof I speak. There are some people who are employers who stand in the way of their employees having access to trade union representation. The General Secretary is on the floor of the Parliament. The General Secretary is on the floor of this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, sir. I invite her to stand on a point of order if I am misleading the House. Because it is a fact, sir, that these are the things that are happening in your Barbados, Mr. Speaker. Now, how can it be that in 2022 and 2021, we are facing that type of behavior? When the battle was fought and won since 1938 in Barbados. The battle has been fought, Mr. Speaker, all latter 1930s, early 1940s. These matters were laid to rest in this country. And now, out of a clear blue sky, out of acts of self-centeredness and individual-mindedness, the collective and the achievements that we struggled to make, the gains that we fought hard, are compromised. And these are the things, sir, quite frankly, that the Honourable Minister of Labour is forced to contend with. So I admire and I respect the calm and measured approach that he has brought to the unenviable task of dealing with some of these persons who behave almost as if they were reptilian creatures. Slithering around the island, seeking to do damage by stealth to our fellow citizens and the people who sent all 30 of us to this Parliament of Barbados. That is why legislation of this type has to come. That is why we have to go even further in the way in which we build the safeguards to prevent labor from being exploited, Mr. Speaker, sir. But I say, and I say again, that I want this to be a debate in which all of Barbados engages itself. I do not want the Chamber of Commerce to feel that they're all to be dubbed with one broad brush because there are good folks there. What I call on the Chamber of Commerce to do is to speak now with authority in a manner that signals its disapproval and its contempt for this type of behavior. Because there are those out there who know very well that Medford neighbor, the honourable member for Christchurch East Central neighbor, the honourable member for Christchurch South neighbor, Ralph Thorne, that their neighbor, sir, is a man working in the construction sector and getting his money taken away from him because retention is being taken out of his pay pack without lawful authority. And if it is happening to that one man, it bet your bottom dollar, Mr. Speaker, sir, it's happening to others as well. And this cannot be a new ethos of behavior that we allow to proliferate across the island. It has to be stamped out, sir. And that is why legislation of robust type dealing with labor relations, industrial relations in Barbados is absolutely critical. But I again say, and I re-emphasize, and will re-emphasize forever, that there is a room for moral suasion on these matters. And that the Chamber of Commerce, the Small Business Association, and all those related umbrella agencies must now speak to those people who they represent and tell them, pull up their hall and pull up selector. This cannot work in your Barbados and mine. It's hard to come under the umbrella. And you know, this is what I find very strange. Everybody can cramp under the umbrella and come to government and say, I want a little help. I want some concessions. I want a little ease. The honourable member for St. George North will tell you, when the pandemic struck, there was no shortage of people in the hospitality sector who came forward and said to government, we want a little ease. Multiple millions of dollars. But at the same time, I had to preside with the same honourable member for St. Peter. I believe the honourable member for St. Peter remembers the meeting well at Lloyd Erskine Sandyford, sitting to my left. across the table from the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. Capital on the other side of the room. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it is laid bare that they got people who are denying access to trade union representation. Not letting people get access to a little NIS money. Mr. Speaker, you know as though the NIS never existed, but still presenting themselves for assistance. No, you can't have a Barbados that works that way. And if we allow that type of behavior to go on unbridled and unharnessed, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, what will happen is that you will have a vast majority of this country losing faith in the system. And in harsh economic times, when everybody is being asked to walk on a bed of nails, you cannot have a too few, who are floating on a seeming cushion of comfort. It will not work, Mr. Speaker, sir. And that is why it is necessary to have on board and in sync with us those agencies of the private sector, whether they represent tourism, whether they represent the construction sector, whether they represent commerce generally, wherever they represent, Mr. Speaker, sir, being able to say and hold up a sign, a billboard, if you will, to their fellow employers and investors in Barbados, that is not the way in which we can afford to do it in this small country. Because if that is the route that we go, then we imperil everybody else. I listened carefully.
Honourable has 2 more minutes.
I listened, thank you, sir, I listened carefully to the class analysis of which the Honourable Member for St. Michael East delivered himself. It would have made students in the reading room of the university, sir, and the Hill exceptionally proud. But there is a place, I think, Mr. Speaker, for us to have this deliberate discussion. And there's a way for us to have this deliberate discussion without going into the antagonistic nature of what Marxist class analysis would deliver to us. I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we are all Barbadians, for the most part. And those who are visitors to our shore must assimilate the culture. And that culture, sir, must be reflected across the board. It can't be in fits and starts. And I want, Mr. Speaker, sir, for capital in Barbados, and equally those elements of government. Because I mentioned the NIS just now, and we know that there are elements of the government who have run afoul of that, but have struggled to get it corrected. We know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that in straitened circumstances, from time to time, these things will happen. But we also must never lose sight of the overarching objective, that this country needs growth. In order to get growth, Mr. Speaker, sir, we need to have our businesses function. We need, therefore, to have labor working comfortably with capital for there to be industrial peace and coexistence. And that cannot happen, sir, unless we start to have a holistic conversation and recognition about the importance of workers and workers' rights and the conditions of work in this country. This, sir, is a piece of legislation whose time has come. It has been long in coming. I am exceptionally proud to be part of a government, sir, which has brought it to this place. I am exceptionally proud, Mr. Speaker, sir, to call and name as my friend and ally the Honourable Member for St. Peter, who has brought it to this place, sir. And I want to urge that this House give it its fullest support. I am obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, sir. I intend to be very brief, not the brief like the speaker before me, but genuinely very brief, sir, even though he was extremely good and thorough. Very brief, sir, as I share a few thoughts on this bill. Sir, first of all, like most speakers, I am left wondering oftentimes why it is that we still have to be debating these things, and why it is that we have to bring these things into a parliament and pass legislation to do what to me just seems so obvious. as to be run-of-the-mill, almost. And that we are met sometimes with opposition on these things continue to baffle me. And not only here, in a number of other matters pertaining to the disabled, to the elderly, and so on. Sometimes it baffles me that we are at this point where we still must pass legislation, sir, to do these things. But I want to begin, sir, by commending the Honourable Member for St. Peter, sir, on this brilliant piece of legislation, but I am not surprised. It is the same member, sir, who brought to us the minimum wage legislation, a brilliant piece of legislation, sir. It is also the same member who brought to us the prevention of discrimination legislation, sir. So I am really not surprised. It's also the same member, sir, who has elevated the discourse in the labor space. And he may not want me to tell tales out of school, but one that is being sought after by the international community. So I am not surprised, sir, that he has brought this very forward-thinking piece of legislation, sir, and to protect ordinary people in this country, sir. And, you know, I must tell you, sir, I must begin by telling you, I may have told you a story around the lunch table one time, that I used to be, sir, an employee in a factory. My first job was actually sweeping the floor in a factory. I used to make beds and stuff pillows. And in that factory, you used to get 10 cents a pillow. Stuffing pillows. Sorry, sir, Mr. Speaker, sir, you had to stuff so many pillows. I won't finish the story, but you had to stuff so many pillows to make a living, sir. But if you go to lunch, sir, and you come in a minute late, your pay used to be docked for an hour. You go to break, and you come in a minute late, you're paid docked for an hour. You come in late on the morning, you're docked for an hour. Mind you, if you're in the queue, because you had to punch the clock, and you're a few seconds late, your pay is docked for an hour, sir. In this Barbados, sir. So I know what it is to have to deal with ordinary things. At the end of the week, you're carrying home $70 and $80 because so many deductions coming out your pay at the end of the week. And you tell yourself that could not be happening in Barbados. I know what I'm talking of because it happened to me. And I haven't forgotten, sir, that this is the way of this country, sir. This is going to be perhaps the shortest speech I deliver in this parliament, I hope. But sometimes you say that and then you get to talking. But, sir, this legislation, sir, is important because I feel that we have to protect people where they work. We have to protect ordinary people, sir. And we're not saying that this is going to be a free-for-all, that employees will now walk into a business place and do as they like, that employees can come in and dress as they like, that they too don't have responsibilities. They too have responsibilities. We're not telling them to walk in and be disrespectful to their employers because sometimes people hear in legislation what they want to hear. We're not telling them to do any of these things, sir. But we are saying that employers have a responsibility to look after their employees and to make sure that when they are at work that they are safe. And that is all that we are saying here. But that the legislation before this parliament, sir, it is fair, it is reasonable, sir, and it really and truly only kicks in terms of penalties when people don't do the things that they're supposed to do. And it saves the company in the long run a lot of money and a lot of time and a bad reputation to do these things, sir. And we have a lot of employers who are coulda, woulda, shoulda employers. They don't do the things they're supposed to do. And then they're saying they shoulda, they coulda, they woulda. But this legislation, sir, is putting it squarely on the table. These are the things we expect you to do, and we expect you to be able to do them. And, sir, people have to understand, sir, that, in Barbados, there are not a lot of options. I mean, to be frank. In 2022, most people will stay in a job even if they don't like it because the options are so limited. It reminded me, sir, of the 1838 post-emancipation period in Barbados, sir, when slavery was abolished and yet most of the people stayed on the plantation because in Barbados there really wasn't any other place to go but the plantation. It reminds me, sir, of that, not that it is the same condition, sir, but that the options are so limited in Barbados. And I recognize, sir, that even as the international circumstances make it harder for people, sir, we are still doing what we have to do as a government to be able to protect ordinary people, sir. And I know many people, sir, who've been injured on jobs and have not said anything. I mean, we speak, sir, the Honourable Member for St. Michael East, sir, speaks about black people, and many of us have been indoctrinated to believe that the meek and mild will inherit heaven, and that no matter how somebody treat you, you are not to say anything, anytime at all. And so many people get treated badly in employment, sir, and they don't say a word. And you say, let me go and defend you. They don't even want you to defend them. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want them to discriminate against my daughter. My children still got to eat in this country. These are the things that you hear. This is real life. And that we have people, sir, who get unfair and fear and are afraid to talk about it. And we have, sir, as part of our legislation and as the Honourable Member rules it, so we have to encourage people to be bold and to be brave, and that this country, sir, must protect those who come forward and speak on behalf of themselves. Because when they do so, they speak on behalf of other ordinary people, sir. But, sir, there are really only two things that I really wanted to say, sir, about this bill. And before I do, sir, I recognize in the legislation, sir, that it speaks to training. It's going to be important, sir, that we train people to be able to deal with all these things, the protective gear, sir, the PPE, sir, the necessary stuff, sir, in relation to safety. These are important things, but people have to know how to be able to use them. But there are two things, sir, that really concern me, I must confess. Sir, the first, the Honourable Member for St. Philip North spoke to in relation to mental health. And I know it's not specific to this bill, sir, but it really troubles me. Of course, having spent yesterday in Breezy Hill, mental health is predominantly now on my mind. Because there are many people, sir, who are dealing with health issues, mental health issues, and we're sweeping these things under the carpet. And when they manifest themselves in the most heinous of ways, sir, is when we start to take notice. And I say that, sir, because I know, sir, even in the last few years with COVID, it has become extremely hard for a number of people. And it's not only when they show up in the workplace, but the time they're in the workplace, they've done damage. Done damage. The last 2 years, sir, 3 years, in general, the last many years, but the last two in particular have been so hard on our children, sir. And all the international studies have taught us that people between 15 to 24 have a disproportionate share of mental health issues. And that people between 15 to 24 are normally the first group out there experimenting with drugs. So that you have a lot of young people, sir, who are perhaps experimenting with drugs, who are facing all kinds of pressures, who don't have to deal with COVID, have to deal with online school, have to deal with frustrated parents, domestic issues in the household, sir. These people then go and get jobs. And they come to the workplace broken, many of them. And in the same way, as I said this morning in relation to elderly, you can't start addressing elderly issues at 65. You have to start dealing with these issues from birth. You can't start dealing with somebody's health issues at 70. When the person already is a bad diabetic and has lost a limb, you got to deal with these things earlier. The same thing applies to mental health, sir. There are a number of people who are in our workforce, sir, in our workplace, who need help. We have to be able to help them. When I used to work for the Canadian government, sir, I tell people this story. You go and you say to your boss, I feel stressed out today. And they have to ask you all kinds of questions. It is incumbent on them to figure out what you mean when you say you're stressed out. Because stress is real. And the same stress, sir, could cause an employee to make a mistake when he normally would not make a mistake. If you're tired, if you're under pressure at home, if you're under pressure in the workplace, sir, these things, sir, could lead a person to make a mistake. It is not easy. It is not something we should sweep under the carpet. And in the last few years, because a lot of employers realize that people are desperate to hold on to their jobs, I have constituents in St. Michael's South, sir, who tell me that they had to endure all kinds of things. Employers telling them all kinds of things, speaking to them in the most demeaning way. Because they know that in the environment there was not another job for them. And that my people, sir, your people in St. Michael Central, having to stick into jobs, sir, and be demeaned and degraded. Because the conditions, the prevailing economic conditions, sir, made it so. And that we have to be able to protect these workers. So whenever the Honourable Member for St. Peter brings a piece of legislation in this chamber, sir, I see the social side of it. He does too. Because to me, this is what we were elected to do. And I'm saying, sir, that the incident in Breezy Hill may be one that attracts the front page, sir, but that we have a lot of people who are dealing with mental health issues in Barbados, sir, and in the workforce, in the workplace. And some of them are employees, and God knows, sir, some of them are employers too. And that everybody, sir, we have to be careful, sir, because all kinds of people need help, sir. I also take the point, sir, that the people who control the means of production in this country, sir, sometimes can overextend themselves. I understand that, of course. But I got a lot of managers, sir, who don't own nothing. They're just working for the man, and they treat people worse than anybody else. People who have access to keys that barely let you in or out the gate and treat to you like you were a dog in this country, sir. And when we're talking, we got to talk all the facts. Because I know that happens in Barbados. People treat to other people in all kinds of ways, sir. In Barbados, sir, it is, I often ask myself sometimes if the circumstances were reversed, and if those who were the proletariat, the member for St. Michael East, know what I mean, became suddenly the bourgeoisie, if these behaviors would change, that if we could link these things necessarily to color, or if it is that power drives men to do some insane things. I wonder sometimes, sir. I had been a poet, and I remember a piece I had, and the ending was, when I see some brothers prospering and forgetting the rest that's suffering, I tell myself, that's a sad situation for that man to be in, to love the thing that hated him most. That is serious. And many of us, sir, love the thing that hated us most, sir. Many of us were tools in a production process, cogs in a wheel, sir. Many of us, I know that we have a little access to power, we're treating other people badly. People come into work, sir, you want a man to be working with all kinds of heavy things, but you don't want to give him boots. Or you tell a man, sir, from the first day he started work, you got to show up in here, you work with this heavy equipment, but you got this expensive boot. Where we didn't get the money from? And I feel, sir, these are things that we have to be looking at. So the other point that I wanted to raise, sir, before I sat, sir, is in relation to disability, sir. And that this legislation, sir, to me is a prevention being better than cure. It's really prevention being better than cure. Because if you do what you are supposed to do as an employer, and hopefully as an employee, the probability of you being injured on the job, sir, is reduced significantly. And you may not think that that is your responsibility as an employer, sir, but all of us in this country carry the burden, sir. And all of us, sir, have a responsibility to look after those who are disadvantaged and those who are vulnerable. And you're telling me, sir, that you're going to put a man in a situation where he's likely to be disabled, or worse yet, to be killed, and that we have to come to Parliament and pass legislation for you to do the right thing, sir, and then to compound the situation and make it worse, people are going to oppose it. It's going to cost them too much. What is the cost of a life, sir? What is the cost of a life? You telling me it's going to cost too much? You telling me people can't afford to do this and do that, sir? It is too expensive to do anything other than to put this legislation into place, sir. We have many persons, sir, in this country who have disabilities, sir, that they got on jobs. Many people who got injured on jobs. Many people, sir, who may not have been so permanently crippled, sir, but who, when they spoke out, got fired in Barbados, and that they're afraid to speak out, sir, because they know other people that get fired, or that they know other people, sir, that ain't get nothing in the deal. And that is what is happening in this country, sir. And that is why when the Honourable Member says, for St. Michael East says that you have to be brave, I know that the Honourable Member for St. Peter is brave, because this legislation, sir, seeks to right a wrong, sir. I also feel, sir, as I close, really, the Honourable Member for St. Philip North also spoke to it in relation to gender. And that the issues, sir, that women face, sir, in this country also need addressing. And that is why I like the fact that in this legislation, sir, it speaks not necessarily in direct terms, sir, but anybody who is affected, sir, depending on the job, sir, according to what is reasonable, because it must stand the test of reasonableness, that women too must have certain things when they work. And that is the kind of Barbados, sir, that we have to be able to create, sir. And I feel, sir, that when I look at the overall implications for this bill that is before the House, when I look at what it will do for ordinary Barbadians, sir, when I look at the fact that jobs are hard to come by, sir, in the port, for example, there are people who've been working there longer than I have been alive. When people get a job that they feel they like, they stay in it for long, they don't want to change. You know, Bajans are very risk averse, so if you get a good job, you probably stay in it for life. And you hear some people going from job to job, sir, especially a lot of these jobs, sir, job to job to job, sir, they're getting treated bad. Men risking at the women on the job. You know, you gotta do certain things if you want to stay in this job, sir. I am saying in the modern Barbados, sir, in the year 2022, sir, these things that are before this house, sir, that the Honourable Member for St. Peter just brought in this bill, sir, are things that we should not even have to legislate. These are things, sir, that are just the right thing to do. And so, sir, yes, it is really an issue of basic human rights. And that, perhaps, sir, is probably the best context within which to frame this discussion. I say to you, sir, that I give this legislation, obviously, my most strident support, sir. I want to thank the Honourable Member for St. Peter for bringing the legislation to this House. On behalf of the good people in St. Michael's South, sir, and in St. Michael's Central, you know we're brothers, I want to thank him, sir, so that our ordinary citizens, sir, could have access to some good things. Sir, to say that we came here, sir, to protect ordinary people is true, but it doesn't mean anything unless we do things like this, sir. So on behalf of those people, sir, I want to support this legislation, sir, and say to the people of Barbados, sir, that the Honourable Member for St. Peter has done a good thing on their behalf, and that we should all be proud, sir, to have this kind of legislation in this House. Thank you, sir.
Honourable Member for Christchurch, West Central.
Mr. Speaker, I promise not to belabor the House. I probably would not be as short and sweet as the member who just spoke, the Member of Parliament for St. Michael's South, but I promise you that I will try to do justice to which that is given to me. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to start with an old axiom, one given to me by an old lady in St. Joseph, and I'll be minded to call her name, you know. It is no secret that I have an irreversible gamut with the elderly. And I want to say that, given to me by an old lady in St. Andrew, the Member of Parliament for St. Joseph would know her name, Lynn. And she always reminded me that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. An ounce of prevention, Mr. Speaker, sir, is worth a pound of cure. And I want to say that this legislation amendment really exemplifies, in essence, what this axiom speaks to. Because, Mr. Speaker, what I heard exposed earlier by the Member of Parliament from St. Peter, in terms of the amendments to this bill, if we are able, and I know we will realize it within the next couple of months, will prevent a lot of the ills that are happening in the society in Barbados as it relates to employer and employees and in the whole workforce. And I want to say to him, I commend him for his effort today. But he was able to deliver a bill and went even to the microscopic level. And I will talk about the microbes too. Because the Member of Parliament for St. Peter was able to distill some of the delusions that we had. He went as far as to explain to us a simple misnomer, which I never understood too when he talked about highly inflammable. Because he was able to tell us that that is the biggest misnomer ever in the world. You hear it on Chicago fire and all these things is even found in the dictionary. Highly inflammable. When the reality is that it's highly flammable. Because inflammable also already speaks to highly flammable. That is the type of detail that the Member of Parliament of St. Peter brought to this House in explaining the legislation so that ordinary Barbadians understand the seriousness of that which we are speaking of. But at the microscopic level, and dealing with the microbes, there are two things that the Member of Parliament for St. Philip North alluded to: sick building syndrome and building-related illness. And Mr. Speaker, in order for me to fully ventilate as Minister of the Environment, I would have to raise my right flag today, obviously, to speak about sick building syndrome. Because the perfect example, if you're talking about sick building syndrome, and for those in listening earshot, sick building syndrome specifically refers to the illnesses, the symptoms or the group of symptoms associated with you entering a building. It may be very acute. It may be itchy skin, runny eyes, runny nose. Those are the things that you associate with yourself when you go into a particular building. Sick building syndrome. And a lot of us in here experience it in this August chamber. 375 years old, that was built on a water course. And I want to thank those persons who work to get and to do the remedial work so that we'll be here today having this type of conversation. Because in the same way that we are able to criticize employers when they are doing wrong, I want to say, because this government also has a lot to be proud of. Because we are not only protecting the member of parliament, that sit in this August chamber, we are protecting the 40-something or 50-something or so other workers who work in this parliament. When we make things right for them in terms of this building, when we are able to change the ventilation, because a lot of persons talk about air conditioning. You can't talk about air conditioning alone when you are dealing with buildings and making conditions easier for persons to operate in buildings. You have to talk about air conditioning and ventilation, how the air circulates. And I'm saying, as part of the remedial effort in this very building, there was a change in the way how air is ventilated. We understand that these salt stones were able to catch a lot of water, and they expose the environment to water vapor and change the humidity, which allows for both fungi and different types of bacteria to be associated with this building. What the builders did is that they changed by including different components to the white mortar that is exposed as on the walls, and allow now for less water to be attracted to the building, making conditions less favorable for fungi and bacterial growth. And this is the type of things that we need to associate with buildings. So I'm saying not only the environmental department, but environmental health officers who came in and did the inspection. I want to pay a tribute to them today. Because here we are, after a problem was exposed, that we are able to fix it. So that is what this government, along with the legislation, because you're not only talking the talk, but you have to do the do. After a problem is identified in your workplace, it's putting corrective measures in place to solve them. So all the work that took place in here, I want to pay tribute to the workers. Because here we are today, I have not heard anybody talking about any associated problems with sinusitis and what's not. But I want to say today, Mr. Speaker, this government is a government of action. We recognized there was a problem, and we started to put measures in place because we were not only thinking about ourselves, but we are thinking about your employees, Mr. Speaker. We are thinking about the maid. We are thinking about the persons who help, the cooks, the chefs, the servers. We are talking about the clerks in here who have to expose themselves on a regular basis to the environment, and they were complaining too. So this is the type of action we need as soon as we recognize that there is a problem in the workplace, and that is what this legislation speaks to. Mr. Speaker, sir, we are not only talking about the building of Parliament, but there are a lot of things that this government started since 2018. And I don't need to take responsibility. I don't need anybody to pay homage to me. But look what happened at the sanitation department. For the past 20, 30 years, you call it, there has been a concern as it relates to associated work problems and what we call occupational health problems. There is the ever-present problem associated with lifting heavy garbage cans. There were injuries documented and undocumented with those workers at the Sanitation Service Authority. And I want to pay a tribute to them for standing the test of time and the hardest of conditions. And if, as a government, we say that conditions, in our opinion, were not favorable. And the first thing we did, and I want to thank all those who were involved in ensuring that we realize the dreams of the sanitation workers by putting lifters on the truck so that the sanitation men and women will not have to lift those heavy garbage cans. That is the action plan that we have. So you recognize that there is a problem, an occupational problem, because government must lead by example. We are not only telling the employers in the private sector to do the right thing, but we intend as a government to also do the right thing. And that is why we move apace to have lifters so that those workers won't have to lift these big heavy garbage cans as part of our residential waste improvement project. Where they push out the cans now, I see them all over Barbados, pushing the cans, and the automatic lifters on the truck lift up those heavy garbage cans, and they automatically lift into the back of the truck. This is a government that cares. And that is why we are saying that this legislation, if followed, and we intend to make sure that it is implemented, that it can bring relief to all sectors in Barbados, including the workers at sanitation. And I'm proud today to say that the project is almost 95% completed in terms of the distribution. And to say to all those in Barbados who haven't received cans as yet, that your dream of having a garbage can will come true under my watch. Because it is a simple, basic need that we will satisfy. I want to say so. I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, that when you are talking about air condition, ventilation of buildings, when you are talking about intake, the purification of air, the ability for it to circulate, it must be part of the town and country planning approval. And I'm saying that the Environmental Protection Department, a department under my ministry, is part of that whole discussion to ensure that in every single building, commercial or otherwise, that when the plans come into town and country planning, that they align themselves with that which is the basic requirement for proper air ventilation, for air quality, for purification, and all that is necessary so when Barbadians, workers, customers, whoever enter those facilities are able to breathe fresh air without the pollutants amongst now. And we are speaking about ambient air quality here. That speaks to the amount of pollutants in a specific environment. And I'm saying that, along with that, what this legislation seeks to do is to ensure that we have the testing, that when an employee works in an environment for over a period of time, that you won't have to worry about the ozone being released from the machines as they operate. That the heat associated with those machines, especially those big printing machines, that heat does not cause an effect on the employee. And the noise, you heard the Member of Parliament for St. Peter spoke about the noise and decibels and how it had an adverse effect on persons and employees over a period of time. Noise pollution, a big issue in Barbados. I will speak to it another time, not right now. But these are the things and other hydrocarbons being released that are not only harmful to the health of persons, but harmful to the environment. And as an environmental minister, we already know the challenges and the existential threat that was on the lips of every single Barbadian prior to COVID-19 as we know it. And that's climate change. Because of these extra chemicals being released in the atmosphere. So what I'm saying is that the environment where workers operate must be devoid of these harmful chemicals. But there are a lot of diseases associated with these chemicals if allowed to remain stagnant in an environment where they are inhaled by humankind. And I will just go through a short list because the legislation speaks to these things, and to speak to these chemicals, we might call them persistent organic pollutants. There may be a big fancy word, you call it POPs for short if you want to call it that, but there are certain chemicals which we are saying must be tested in an environment to ensure that they're not being inhaled or exposed to the employees as they carry out their duties. For instance, you have diseases caused by asphyxiants, chemicals that causes problems with you breathing and the ability to inhale and what's not. Carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, those types of things. And you often associate hydrogen sulfide with that chemical being released from the seaweed and what's not. Benzene, nitrates and other compounds, the disinfectants, the sprays, even the insecticide you spray in a closed room. We are saying to employers that they can't afford to be spraying an environment, even for insecticides, that way will speak to biodiversity and to be able to vocalize, even if I get glottal fry, about the importance of having these other biodiverse species and the existence of them so that we won't have to use the insecticides, the herbicides and pesticides as we are using them now, because all of these things affect building-related illnesses and building syndrome. And you have to have a serious conversation if you are really talking about the existence of your country and the existential threats that we face. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, things like arsenic and even the citronella a person's put around the room. You go in a lot of business places, you smell the citronella, but it can cause effects on person's eyes and sinuses and stuff. So there must be a sensitivity to all the chemicals used, the chemicals to clean, for instance, Mr. Speaker. That is the type of conversation, because if you put down Clorox in a room, trust me, Mr. Speaker, you may have some person that are allergic to the smell of Clorox. And it makes the condition very unfavorable for the employee. This is the type of conversation we need to have. We need to be able to allow the employees to speak to their sensitivities and to ensure that we do everything in our power to make the condition as favorable as possible in a workplace. We also have a duty as employers to ensure that the environment, the way how we build our buildings, the windowsills, for instance, there are windowsills that are now built where there is no deposit for water conservation, which means that there is less environment for mold and fungus to grow in. These are the simple, basic things in building designs that we have to study and be serious about if you're looking at every single aspect of the employee to make sure they are not exposed to the vagaries of diseases and other additional problems. Mr. Speaker, it is an important part of the conversation, the way how we treated these basic things that persons take for granted. When you are talking about ambient air quality, we are speaking about the environment surrounding businesses. It is hard to see you are opening a business and you're employing 10 and 12 persons. But if that business that you are opening is an environment where the microparticles, and we have ambient air quality devices that can test those microparticles wherever you operate. And if you're saying that you are going to go in an environment, you have to ensure that there are not particulate matter that can be inhaled. Those small microparticles, less than 2.5 or so, around there, that can be inhaled and go into the respiratory system and cause adverse effect for asthma and what's not. And that is what we call the building-related illnesses. Those illnesses from buildings that can cause chronic conditions. You have the likes of asthma, you have the likes of severe rhinitis and sinusitis, you have dermatitis, which is the skin, affects the skin, and there are a variety, Mr. Speaker, sir, of illnesses that could affect persons in a serious way, pneumonia and what's not. And we are saying that employers have a duty to ensure that not only inside, but outside is safe as well. The way how you run water and make sure it's not stagnant, that can breed mosquitoes and what's not. That is the type of conversation. That there is no smoke being emitted because of burning of any fossil fuel or anything. These are the things that will infect persons who operate inside buildings. Because you must remember that the air outside gets in at some point in time. From the time the door open, air gets in. You saw it in its full effect when we had the volcanic ash. You had ash all over your house, Mr. Speaker. And I will always say, biodiversity again will save us. Because I have walked the length of breadth of the Barbados. And I will continue to speak of biodiversity, whether in here or elsewhere, and the importance. Not because the United Nations is saying it as part of their General Assembly's call that we must be able to augment 30% of our biodiversity by year 2030. It must be a Barbadian call. So trees being an active part of our biodiversity and the importance of our forestry to be able to shield us from all that ash that would have gone into buildings and workspaces too. Because, Mr. Speaker, we may not take note, but if you look at all the trees when they had the volcanic ash, what you saw, the ash was deposited on the leaves of the tree, which means the trees shield us from a lot of the ash getting in our buildings. That is the effects of having a trust, an equal trust, in our biodiversity, how we build it out. And these are not things that we can take for granted. Or without trees, a lot of us would probably die from a lot of asthma-related type illnesses. Because we couldn't breathe. The simple reality of it. And these are the things, so I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, that we have to protect. We have to protect not only inside of the workspace, but outside as well, because there are inextricably linked. There's an interfusion between what happens outside the workplace and inside. And I want to say that employers must be mindful of all the activities that are happening around the immediate workspace and the environment to ensure that they do things to mitigate the effects of having the air that the employees breathe and the other environment to ensure that nothing happens to destroy the purity of the environment and to ensure that there is a safe, protective environment so that the workers can operate and give of their fullness. Because you heard the Member of Parliament for the productive sector spoke about the lack of productivity when those persons have to go home sick. You've heard it all over. And he spoke about the challenges involved in the litigation as it relates to having those matters resolved and getting doctors' report. These stories are well documented across Barbados. And if we are serious, because at the end of the day, these legislations that we bring here speak to one thing, it speaks to the protection of the ordinary person, not only ordinary person, the protection of every single person in Barbados. Because we came here on a mantra that speaks to the fact that we care about Barbadians. We care about their livelihoods. We care about them having a stake in this country and be able to work in an environment that is conducive and safe. That's what we said. And I want to laud the Member of Parliament for St. Philip South. He's not here now. My good friend from St. Philip South, who took it upon himself to correct an ill. They ain't call it building-related illness or building syndrome, but an ill in the agriculture industry where women, Mr. Speaker, old women, and you know how I feel about that, had to go miles, Mr. Speaker, to use a bathroom facility. And the Member of Parliament, because this is a government that came on the mantra of caring. And you heard the word, it's a nice coin phrase, me cares. This government cares. And we came to Parliament and said, we will fix by example. And the type of legislation that the Member of Parliament for St. Peter is bringing to this Parliament is just a recognition that we care, and that's what we come to government to do. So when the Member of Parliament for the South said to Barbadians, enough is enough, and I'm going to ensure that there are mobile toilet facilities in Barbados so that the agricultural workers can have a sense of dignity so they don't have to go in the bush to be able to do that which is basic in terms of body function. I want to applaud him for that, because that is a step in the right direction, and that is the action plan that we're speaking about. These are the things that we are saying as a government, not what I say. And Mr. Speaker, I can wrap up now, but not what I say. Don't do what I say. And it's not about what I say, but you have to do what you say. So it's doing the do to ensure, and we have to lead by example. That's what I said, Mr. Speaker. We started by doing that in the Sanitation Service Authority. There was a problem, and we faced it and fixed it. And we are going to go through systematically every single department in government. That is what the Parliament of St. Peter told us earlier. He is going to ensure that the legislation is not only a legislation that is exposed pretty, and that we are able to vocalize and have a lot of pretty talk in Parliament about, but he is going to ensure that using the collective sinew of every single ministry involved, Environmental Protection Department, the Ministry of Health, with the health officers, and once his labor officers, to ensure that employees do right by the people of Barbados and by this legislation. That is what this member of Parliament of St. Peter said as part of his speech this morning. And I want to commend him for taking the brave step. Because we said as a government from 2018, we will disrupt if the disruption will redound to the benefit of the ordinary person and Barbadians by extension. Mr. Speaker, I don't need to say any more. I don't need to catch vocal fright. Enough has been said in this parliament already to be able to augment the legislation and to say to Barbadians that it is the right thing to do at the right time. It is the right legislation. And I want to end by saying, Mr. Speaker, safety. If you're serious about it, safety. It is able to bring first aid to the uninsured. Safety. And once it is realized, is able to bring first aid to the uninsured. That's what safety is. And if you're serious about safety, and you're able to extrapolate based on what you're saying, you know that if it's able to bring first aid to the uninsured, what it can do for the ordinary Barbadian. Mr. Speaker, I will start by saying it's important. And now, all age by the old folk, I like to associate myself with the elderly. Safety is rather being safe than sorry. And we don't want a lot of sorry folk in this country. We want excited, happy people. We want employees that are able to realize their true potential. We want employees that are able to be part of the productive sector, to drive this country, to remove ourselves out of these difficult times. We want that level of vibrancy, and we want to be able to ensure the existence of the next generation and the next generation of workers. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank all the members who have shared so far, because everyone has shared so well on this very important piece of legislation that is needed to be able to take Barbados forward in terms of the terms and conditions that we present to labor, and that we create an environment of comfort, an environment of convenience, an environment of care in which our people are going to function. Now, in my past life as a human resources and management consultant, I would have worked with any number of companies, both here in Barbados and across the region, working to help them be able to increase productivity, help them to increase their profitability. And therefore, across my career, I would have encountered any number of situations, Mr. Speaker, that demonstrated the various types of employers that you tend to confront in any environment. And one of the things that I learned over time was this, that in relation to how customers are treated, in relation to how labor is treated, you can have some employers where there's a willful indifference to the well-being of people, whether they're staff or customers. Then you can have some who are ignorant of what is required. They really don't understand what it means to have the care of people to manage. And then you have some that don't have the resources as others have to be able to respond to the obligations which they have. And in terms of looking at the well-being of people, there are still too many organizations, too many enterprises that exhibit that willful indifference to the well-being of the people under their charge and under their care. I've seen situations where you have fire hazards, where it was difficult to get that employer to understand that you cannot risk the life of an employee because you don't want the expense or inconvenience to be able to build proper facilities which you could well afford. You also have situations where people don't even want to provide the tools necessary to do the very job, or provide the quality tools that could do the job that they need to have done. And where sometimes the worker has to operate in a place that is not comfortable, whether it has extreme heat or extreme cold, and not recognizing that failing to manage these conditions will result in a lower level of productivity. Then I would have experienced a situation, this was one of the most shocking for me, the willful indifference that where people even did not care that others understood or that the staff understood, you don't really care about me. This was a situation that we were working with where a team got wiped out by illness. And of the 11 people that had to work in a critical department, 9 of them were down with illness, and only 2 were available to do the work. And this was an operation that operated from early in the morning till late at night. So close to 20 hours had to be covered in any one day. And 2 people for 4 weeks worked diligently to cover that operation, to make sure that the customers did not miss a beat. And after the 4 weeks, when the ones who were ill returned from sick leave, and things got back to normal, and they were proceeding on their regular course of business, the manager of the particular department approached his top management and said, "We want to discuss the additional staff that we need for the department," because this was a discussion that had taken place before the illness had occurred, because the department did need people. And the most unfortunate thing, that manager was told, this place operated with 2 people already, and I don't see any reason why I should now go to the expense of bringing other people on board. Because in his mind, if people could stretch out themselves, if people could work themselves to the point of collapse, then he didn't see any need why he should have to bring additional staff. So, Mr. Speaker, you have that willful indifference that's there among certain employers, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And I think that the legislation that is before us, because when people will not do things by choice, then you have to bring regulations. When you do not manage your own behaviors, when you do not govern yourself, someone has to govern you. And the responsibility of the government is to bring the legislation to make sure that those who are willfully indifferent are made to comply. Then there are those who are ignorant of what is required. And there are a lot of us in that situation. And I believe the honorable member who spoke before me outlined this really beautifully in terms of people not understanding or not knowing, understanding how carpets affect people, air conditioning and chemicals and so on. One of the things I have a bugbear with is the furniture that we're getting today, which is made of a lot of chip wood and composite wood, that when the chemical breaks down inside of the furniture, it then begins to give off those particles, and those then begin to affect people. But because of ignorance, because we don't know, because we don't understand the impact, so often people are left to suffer and suffer, and it's only after long years when we see the long-term impacts on people's health that we then recognize that there is a problem. So there is ignorance that can occur, and this is one of the things that has to be addressed. And ignorance can only be addressed by education, by doing research, by monitoring and following trends to understand what is out there, what's the latest thinking, what are the safety measures that are coming on stream as we discover more and more the impact of materials and so on around us. And then there's another group. They're the small struggling enterprises who may be challenged to be able to meet certain requirements which you have, simply because there may be costs involved, or there may be a level of knowledge required in order to do the implementation. And for the sake of those small struggling enterprises, we must always examine legislation and see if we need to put in additional help, additional support to help them to be able to reach a level where they too can provide their employees with the right types of conditions for work. And therefore, that has to be managed. All in all, Mr. Speaker, when this all boils down, the responsibility, the key here is the role of the government, how we play our role, our understanding of the work that we have to do. When you have to manage and build a society and bring it along, when you put your hand up and say, yes, I want to govern, that governing means taking the time to understand deeply every area of your society, of your economy, making sure that you have the best information, have access to the best research, so that you can keep guiding, training, educating, advocating on behalf of the things that need to be done to ensure that your society runs smoothly. And bringing everyone along is not the easiest thing to do. Managing competing interests in your society, that is not easy to do. But one of the things I have to give kudos to this government for is its commitment to the education of its civil service. So often, what would come before us are requests to attend conferences, to go to workshops, to participate in discussions where we are exposed to what are some of the things within our area of responsibility that we need to know more about. Sometimes it is about maritime matters. Other times it's about legal matters. Sometimes it's about education. Sometimes it's about health. Sometimes it's about foreign policy. And our engagement in these workshops help us to stay on top of those topics, to know what is the latest thing happening in that area, so that we can then take that information, bring it back into government, and seek to implement it as part of what we do in our ministries. And where legislation is needed to be able to give effect to that which we have learned, to be able to create that legislation and ensure that that legislation is enforced. And that is what the Honourable Member for St. Peter has done today. And I want to congratulate him on the bill. I want to congratulate the team, because the team would have worked hard to be able to bring this. What I want to do is to encourage him and his team that the next step is going to be necessary. And this is where the monitoring, the enforcement, the management of the different levels of enterprises is going to become important, and that we have to be able to make sure we have the resources. You have the inspectorate body that will be able to make sure and work with your enterprises to make sure that they're complying. Though the inspectorate has to be well trained, they have to be above reproach, they cannot be open to bribing. They need to be wise in how they work and counsel the management of a company and work with it to help it to meet the standards that are set in law for them to meet. That's the responsibility that we have. That is the responsibility we have towards the people which we govern. One last thought, Mr. Speaker, and I think it was mentioned by the Honourable Member for St. James Central, and he spoke about the medical people giving speedy reports. I'm an MP. I have members of my constituency who have been injured. They've been injured and they can no longer work. This has disturbed their lives and disturbed their capacity to be able to follow on the dreams which they had. They never imagined that they would have been confronted with such a situation where they could no longer work, and now the house is at risk, the children's lives are at risk, the dreams and so on, because we have a problem with resolving these matters within the legal system. And so often, even sometimes when a judgment is brought, the length of time it takes for the person to receive their due goes on for years and years and years. And I want to admonish us as a country. One of the things the Bible talks about is that we should not oppress the faces of people, and don't let people have to cry out to God for help when they need justice. And one of the things we want to be able to do as a society, as we continue this journey of reform, as we continue this journey of change, is to continue to work with all of our systems to see that they deliver on time. And so that people who have been injured, people who have cases that need a result, that we will get to that place where we'll be able to do it in a speedy way. It will make for a kinder society, it would make for a just society, and it would create peace and security for the citizen to know that his rights are being protected. And I want again to thank the Honourable Member for St. Peter for bringing the piece of legislation, and we trust that it will bring the necessary benefits to our workers, the benefits to our enterprises, and to our wider society. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I wrap up the debate in this chamber on the Safety and Health at Work Amendment Bill 2022, I really have to thank my colleagues, the honourable members in this chamber who contributed so richly to the debate. It reflects, Mr. Speaker, what I think many of us know, and it is that addressing these kinds of matters, matters that impact ordinary people in this country, that we have to be diligent. We have to recognize where we are, where we want to be, and we have to be prepared to do whatever is necessary. I come from the tradition that says that the Lord's biddings are his enablings. And so I don't have the kind of fears, maybe, that others have. I don't fear many things. Death, loss of jobs, the kind of things that people fear for, maybe some people fear for, I don't have any fear for. I live a very simple life. My children will tell you that I can eat biscuits and margarine 3 meals a day. No lunch and meat. So not eating meat reduces my maintenance costs. I may have to beg the honourable member for St. Michael West to give me a few fruits, but I know he wouldn't refuse. But I live a very simple life, Mr. Speaker, and for me for a long time, it's just been work, church, and home. And sometimes in varying orders. But we are called to do that which we are called to do, that which will impact ordinary people in this country. Now, just a few comments before I conclude, or fully conclude. I want to recognize the contribution for the Honourable Member for St. George North, and I identify her, and that's really the only one I'm going to identify, but I'm doing it for a particular reason. From 1938 through 41 and on, this party understands, and if we are diligent in recognizing the evolution of this great political organization, we would know that it has always been understood that when a representative of workers whose job, whose responsibility it is to represent workers, when that person stands in this honorable chamber, even as a part of the parliamentary team of the Barbados Labour Party, that person, because of the ethos of this organization, that person has full range to speak directly to all of us and to you, Mr. Speaker, and to the country about the issues affecting workers in this country. That person is not expected to pull any punches. And I say that just to remind us and to remind the public that from time to time, that honourable member may say things that will make us uncomfortable. That is her role. And as the minister responsible for labour and workers' protection, I embrace that role. And I look forward to her continuing to keep mine and other members' feet to the fire where those issues are concerned. And I have to thank her for speaking clearly always on behalf of and in defense of the workers of this country. I accept what honourable members have indicated, that, it is fine to have legislation, regulations, which will come out of this legislation, or this amendment to legislation. The key, as honourable members have indicated, will come in ensuring that employers, occupiers, owners follow the regulations. We've already indicated that we could do with a few more inspectors, labour officers. But I want to remind us that I already spoke to, particularly in relation to fire. Our intention is to engage every Barbadian as an inspector, maybe out of enlightened self-interest. But we're going to ask Barbadians to look for those fire certificates. And as I said, raise Cain if we don't see them. The other thing I want to say in relation to that is that the substantive act, the Safety and Health at Work Act 2005, speaks to the establishment of health and safety committees in workplaces. In almost all workplaces, it recognizes, as the Honourable Member for St. James South reminds us from time to time, there are different organizations with different levels of resources, etc. And so organizations that are smaller are not compelled to take, for example, you have 6 people working in the organization, to turn the entire work team into a safety and health committee, even though that should be the default position. But in those cases, there is a provision for delegates, safety officers, who will perform that role on behalf of the workers. the Safety and Health at Work Act speaks to the joint committees as joint, equal in representation, workers and management. If they're delegates, safety delegates, then those are representatives of workers. So no manager in a small operation can designate him or herself as that safety officer. That safety officer, if you don't have a team that is joint and balanced, must be a person representing the workers of the organization. Now, I have to issue a call here, both to employers and also to workers and workers' organizations, to work with us, to help us, to make sure that these safety and health committees are functioning in workplaces, and for the smaller workplaces, that the safety delegates are in place. This is important because these committees, these delegates are the persons who are in the workspace on a continuing basis, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week. They are there. They're the ones who know, who can see the risks on an ongoing basis, who know what the trip hazards are, who know what the history of incidents and accidents are. And I'm calling for these safety and health committees, or health and safety committees as the Act refers to them, to function. It is in the interest of workers, it is in the interest of employers, it is in the interest of the organization and society that these health and safety committees function. And I'm calling on all stakeholders. The Ministry of Labor and the Labor Department and its inspectorate will do all that it can with the resources that it has, and will continue, because as we inspect, we ask about, urge operators to have these committees in place. We will continue that, but I'm engaging workers and operators and managers. Please make sure that these committees are in place. Continuing on the matter of some organizations having lesser resources than others. Just about a week and a half ago, I had the privilege of doing a site visit at, of all places, a brewery. Of all places, there are others of us who would have been much more comfortable and would have done much more sampling than I had the privilege to do afterward. But at that brewery, they were celebrating almost 1,350 days without a lost time injury. The Honourable Member for St. George South spoke to that. Those who work in manufacturing enterprises speak about injuries that cause time to be lost. And there's for companies and businesses, operations that are interested in safety and health of their workers, they like the records. And so they push for long stretches of time without injuries that would cause loss of time. So that is to say that there may be incidents, but not anything major. And that is something that companies ought to be pursuing. Now, some companies pursue it, others don't. And I had cause at that company, while recognizing the good work that the company had done in getting to almost 1,350 days without a lost time injury. I recognized at that time that to use them as a case study, as an example, I could understand having come out of the bosom of very small business, that there would be businesses and business owners who would say, but they got whole departments that can look after those things and put all the charts in place and all those kinds of things. I suggested to them and to my labor officers, chief labor officer and other officers who were present at the time, that we would want organizations that are large, well-resourced, and that have built the capacity in this area, occupational safety and health, to help small organizations that do not have a similar capacity. And I'm happy that Banks Buries has agreed that they would help smaller organizations to build the same kind of safety culture that they are so proud of. And I'm calling on other large organizations that take pride in this culture to come forward, identify, and allow us to be able to share the expertise. Just as I indicated earlier that Barbados shares with other islands in the Caribbean, larger businesses in the country are able to share their expertise, their skills, their perspectives with smaller organizations, so that the small organizations that are not able to set up full departments to look at specific areas are able to draw on expertise from those who have already developed the capacity in those areas. We also recognize, Mr. Speaker, importantly, just as we speak about the importance of the implementation and the inspections that my ministry has to do, so we hold our own feet to the fire, we also recognize that there has to be, that we have to continue, because we're already doing it, but we have to continue sharing information. It has to be an ongoing exercise, sharing information about safety and health and welfare with the public, both with workers as well as those who manage enterprises. That sharing of information about the Safety and Health at Work Act, sharing of information in relation to the regulations is something that will be ongoing. We cannot relent on it because the information has to be there. One of the honourable members spoke to the fact that, or to the feeling, that many people may not be aware of all of the details, and that is quite possible. And so we are not going to do any study to see if it is true or not. We'll make the assumption that there are people who do not know all that they ought to know, and we will continue sharing information with them. The matter of penalties also came up, and I'd like to just share that the structure of penalties in the Safety and Health at Work Act is deliberate. And like I said earlier, this act is designed to protect workers. It is not designed to put smaller businesses out of operation. And so in almost every place where you see the amount that was mentioned, a penalty of $100, that penalty of $100 is $100 per day that the infraction remains unattended to, unresolved. Now, the intention there, Mr. Speaker, is that, you can put a $50,000 penalty on an organization, and a small one will go out of business. But that is not the intention. The intention, as in every aspect of our system of justice, is for reform. And so there is a penalty, but the penalty will become large and existential only if the issue is not addressed. And so we see fines like $500 penalty and then $100 for every day that the matter is not addressed. So I just wanted to make that clear so that there is not the feeling that we're just slapping people on the wrist. We really want change of behavior. There was also the mention about Section 6 of Section 5, the term occupier. I agree that we could have added owner and employer in that section, like we did in Section 110 and on. But just to say that that section, that subsection, speaks to the occupier as the person who has control over a workplace and all that is done in the workplace. That person is responsible for making sure that the workplace is safe and is conducive to the health of those who work in that space. We are also, and I need to just share this with the Honourable Chamber, dealing with bringing our legislation together. The Honourable Member for St. George North spoke to legislation being in different places. And that is true, and that it is unwieldy in that form is also true. We recognize that, and we have reached out. I indicated earlier that we reached out to the International Labour Organization on the matter of the Employment Rights Tribunal and how we could better dispense justice, more quickly dispense justice. We have also reached out to them in the same meeting I referred to, and in some communication prior to that, on the matter of examining the creation of a labor code, so that we have the legislation in one place, so that the definitions mean the same thing in all of the pieces of legislation. So it is just easier, both for practitioners in people management, but also, as the Chief Labour Officer and myself often say, the woman on the Clapham bus should be able to understand the legislation that affects her. And so we are working toward developing a labor code that will consolidate the legislation we have and simplify how we approach it. The matter of breastfeeding that was raised by the Honourable Member for St. Philip North is one that the ministry has been agitating on. We've actually formed a bit of an alliance with the Breastfeeding and Childhood Nutrition Foundation, I think it is BCNF. And we do agitate for better conditions for women who are mothers to be able to express milk, to be able to store that milk in the workplace so that it can be given to the children. It is really a very simple thing. The research has been done, and the research is conclusive. Children who are breastfed have much lower incidences of all kinds of illness, and also are better able cognitively. They are able to absorb information, process information. They do better generally at school as well. It is in the interest of everybody to make sure that breastfeeding can take place even when a mother has to return to work. Mr. Speaker, those are the issues that I would want to mention. And I'll end by saying that while we debated and are debating the Act, the amendment to the Act, the actual regulations are in my hand. The regulations that I spoke to earlier, and I want to say to this Honourable Chamber, Mr. Speaker, that today I've signed all of the regulations. They're dated the 5th day of July 2022, under the hand of the Minister responsible for Labour. These will be transmitted to the government's printery for gazetting. And once gazetted, they come into force in the country of Barbados. With those words, Mr. Speaker, I beg that this Safety and Health at Work Amendment Bill 2022 be read a second time.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against it, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that you do now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This House is in committee.
Clauses 1 to 5.
Mr. Chair, I beg that clauses 1 to 5 stand apart.
Seconder, please.
The question is that clauses 1 to 5 stand apart. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 6 to 10.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 6 to 10 stand apart.
The question is that clauses 6 to 10 stand apart. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 11 to 14.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 11 to 13 stand apart. 11 to 14, sorry, stand apart.
The question is that clauses 11 to 14 stand apart. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg that you do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees is reporting the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Mr. Speaker, I do now beg that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I do now beg that this bill be passed and be cited as the Safety and Health at Work Amendment Act 2022.
The question is that this bill be passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we've come to the end of today's sitting. I therefore beg to move the adjournment of the House until Tuesday, the 19th of July at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be adjourned until July, the 19th day of July at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands adjourned Tuesday until Tuesday, the 19th day of July 2022 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.